It all begins in the middle of a ruthless blizzard, where an imposing man surrounded by a crimson aura watches a trail of fallen soldiers on the ground. At that moment, a wounded young warrior approaches from behind, catching the attention of the man, who quickly notices his presence. The man turns around and questions the boy, reminding him that he had entrusted him with the expedition to conquer the East, and asks why he is there. However, the young man remains completely silent, visibly exhausted and bleeding heavily. It is then that the boy reveals he returned with the sole purpose of defeating his own father. Pointing his blood-stained sword, he accuses him of planning everything from the start, using his unit as mere disposable bait to wipe them out. With his eyes glowing in pure fury, the young man calls out to his father with all his accumulated resentment. The man only replies with total contempt, saying that is the only use for a foolish, wingless son like him. This betrayed young man is named Ash Elmheim. He belongs to the prestigious House Elmheim, an extremely powerful lineage of warriors. The leader of this military family is Roderick Elmheim, the protector of the royal family, and the sole wielder of the power of the 7 wings in the country. Ash remembers that, out of pure whim, Roderick rescued him when he was about to freeze to death in a blizzard as a mere baby. Because of this, the young man spent his life fighting fiercely on the battlefields to try to prove his worth. He did everything he could to repay that debt of gratitude, but always ended up humiliated and defeated by the others. His own siblings mocked him for not having a crest of wings, constantly reminding him that he would never be able to make his father proud. In that world, the crest represents someone's magic capacity, and since Ash was the only one unable to use magic in the family, everyone called him the Wingless One. Even though he was humiliated by everyone, he continued training obstinately with the sword, believing that his effort would one day be rewarded. But reality was cruel, and during that expedition in the extreme cold, Ash began to notice that something was very wrong. Looking around suspiciously, he noticed a strange movement hidden among the trees. That was when the terrible reality hit him, and he understood that his own unit was caught in a planned ambush. Now, facing the one responsible for all of this, Ash asks if that terrible betrayal was the answer for him trusting his father up until that moment. Roderick reacts with extreme coldness, stating that he is just an annoying tool and orders him to get out of his sight immediately. Feeling a deep pain mixed with hatred, the young man grits his teeth in the face of such cruelty. Without hesitation, Ash leaps with all his might to strike a blow against his father. In that split second, he realizes how foolish he was to have dedicated his entire life to pleasing that man. The young man bitterly regrets having believed in him at the exact moment his attack is brutally repelled. To his despair, the blow did not even tickle Roderick, who only smiles victoriously while taking a slight scratch to the neck. Suddenly, crimson magic chains appear out of nowhere and bind Ash tightly, preventing any reaction from him. His own siblings appear laughing and begin to tear him apart without any mercy in the blizzard. Totally immobilized by the chains, the young man screams in agony as he is ruined by the cowardly attacks. One of the brothers mocks the situation, saying that a wingless failure would never understand his true place. He completes the humiliation by stating that the fate of a wingless one is just to crawl on the ground like a worm. Fallen and bleeding heavily in the snow, Ash murmurs in agony, questioning why his father took him in back then if he planned to discard him so cruelly. Roderick approaches calmly and warns him not to delude himself, as he never had any use for someone like him from the very start. The man grabs his son by the hair brutally to look him dead in the eye in his final moments. He then reveals that the only thing needed was the power of the 7 wings that secretly dwelt within Ash's body. The young man is completely shocked to hear about the existence of the 7 wings inside him for the first time. Roderick continues his cruel speech, commenting that Ash's mother finally proved useful for something by giving birth to him. He claims she only served to bear that precious seed that would now be used for his own benefit. Desperate and without strength, Ash tries to reach out to his father as he walks away, demanding to know the meaning of those words about his mother. In response, the brothers continue to strike him mercilessly, completely ignoring his desperate cries for answers. Feeling life fading quickly, the young man begins to feel the freezing cold of the snow take over his entire body. He closes his eyes, wondering if this would be his definitive end and what the point of his entire painful existence had been up until then. The boy's vision finally goes dark amidst the silent blizzard that covers the tower of an old church. Shortly after, a gentle feeling of warmth envelops him, and he wonders if he has reached the afterlife as he sees the snowflakes falling. However, he realizes that he is lying right next to the body of a woman in the snow. Upon opening his eyes, he realizes that this is not the afterlife, but pure physical reality. The boy gets completely confused about where exactly he is while trying to move in the middle of that snowstorm. Looking at his extremely small hands and feet, he begins to doubt if that fragile little body really belongs to him. That is when he discovers, to his absolute astonishment, that somehow he ended up going back in time and reincarnated into the body of a helpless baby. Lying in the cold snow, little Ash looks at the woman beside him and realizes that she is already completely gone. Suddenly, his golden eyes spot a beam of magical light shining in the distance, accompanied by shouts of men ordering a search. A group of knights rides desperately through the blizzard, determined to find the woman who fled with the child at all costs. The leader of the soldiers shouts that they need to recover the baby she took no matter what, all for the glory of Lord Roderick himself. Upon hearing that familiar name, little Ash is in absolute shock, widening his large golden eyes. He can barely believe that the men hunting them mentioned Roderick, the very man who betrayed him so cruelly in his past life. The boy quickly deduces that the true target of all that relentless pursuit is himself. Ash begins to put the pieces together and realizes that he has truly returned to the past. On the very same stormy night, he was rescued by his biological father. However, the sound of approaching horse hooves indicates he has no time for hesitation. He decides he will understand this time travel madness better later, because right now the absolute priority is to escape. The little one knows very well that if he keeps standing next to the fallen woman, he will end up falling into the clutches of that terrible family again. With all the effort his tiny body allows, Ash begins to crawl desperately over the frozen ground. He visualizes that he needs to run as far away as possible from there, and a mysterious golden aura begins to emanate from his small hands. Without realizing it, the boy releases an incredibly warm stream of magical power directly into the accumulated snow. Despite the monumental effort for a baby, his breathing gets heavier and more out of breath with every inch covered. He feels his limbs are so warm they seem to be burning inside with that sudden magic. Determined not to repeat the tragic fate of his previous life, the little one moves forward, leaving a deep trail in the snow, swearing he will survive even if he has to crawl. His golden eyes shine with an unwavering determination that things this time will be completely different. The painful memory of being betrayed and discarded by the man he called father drives his tremendous willpower. With the magical power glowing intensely in his hands, Ash swears that one day he will take everything that belongs to Roderick. The tiny baby miraculously manages to crawl for an absurd distance, leaving a lonely trail in the middle of that white vastness. However, his strength finally reaches its limit and he collapses exhausted. Right at the moment, someone in a beautiful green dress approaches. A young little girl with white hair sees the fallen baby and anxiously calls for her father to help him. The man approaches and is visibly surprised to come across such an unusual scene in the middle of nowhere. He picks up the little one carefully, unable to understand how a helpless baby ended up in such a dangerous place. The man cradles the baby in his arms, noting that the little boy is exhausted, but miraculously alive. He observes the child intrigued, realizing there's something very unusual about him. Looking back, the man is shocked to see the miles-long trail the baby left by crawling all that distance by himself in the blizzard. Totally perplexed, the nobleman wonders who in the world that extraordinary child could be. In a bright and cozy space that feels like a dream, Ash floats around confused, not knowing where he is. Just then, a cute little baby with pink hair and bright eyes appears floating among golden feathers to meet him. Ash wakes up startled in a warm bed, grumbling as he feels someone insistently poking his chubby cheek. He opens his eyes and finds himself surrounded by a group of curious little girls who joyfully celebrate the fact that the little one has finally woken up. Totally cornered and getting squished from all sides, the boy panics, not understanding what is going on there. The oldest sister tries to calm everyone down, gently taking the baby into her arms. Annoyed by all that smothering, Ash squirms out of her embrace with a grumpy huff and jumps to the floor. He begins to crawl as fast as he can to escape that nest of noisy girls. The little one hears their shouts behind him as he tries to process that absurd situation. A literal chase begins through the gigantic hallways of the mansion, leaving the boy desperate as he realizes the girls are not going to leave him alone. Seeing that they are almost catching up to him, Ash extends his hand and, suddenly, a powerful golden energy begins to circulate around him. His eyes glow intensely as the stream of magic flows uncontrollably. The magical impulse is so strong that it launches him into the air, making the boy realize with astonishment that he actually possesses magical power in this life. Floating at the ceiling of the grand mansion, he tries to balance himself but realizes he still doesn't know how to control all that energy. The power suddenly fails, and the little one begins to plummet in freefall toward the living room floor. Expecting the worst impact of his life, Ash squeezes his eyes shut, hoping he won't break any bones. However, he ends up falling into the secure arms of the same gray-haired man who rescued him in the snow and who now thinks he's a very bizarre child. Upon opening his eyes and looking at the face of his savior, Ash feels his heart race as he recognizes that figure immediately. He realizes in shock that the man before him is none other than Viscount Hyfried, Roderick's older brother. The little one looks at the imposing architecture around him and can barely believe he ended up in the other branch of the Elmheim family. The man holding him is Hyfried Elmheim, the respected leader of the Viscount family and the main rival of his cruel past father. Ash remembers that Hyfried, alongside his younger brother Roderick, was once one of the two great pillars of protection for the royal family, but ended up losing his life tragically in a civil war. With the early passing of the Viscount, his entire house ended up in total ruin in that timeline. Looking at his own hands, little Ash finally has absolute certainty that he has indeed returned to the past. Except he can't help but find it ironic that he tried to escape the main family only to end up being rescued by the older brother of his worst enemy. The Viscount's wife holds the baby affectionately, commenting that the child's magic must have gone out of control and made him fly, proving he is no ordinary baby. She looks at the little boy with an expression of pure tenderness and warmth. The woman hugs him affectionately and kisses his forehead, saying that all of that must have been very scary, but that he is completely safe there now. Ash is completely frozen and unresponsive in the face of such genuine maternal affection, something he had never experienced before. Hyfried watches the scene with a discreet and satisfied smile upon seeing his wife welcome the little boy. The Viscount then raises his hand and comments seriously that this child carries simply unbelievable power. To prove his point, he gently pulls aside the baby's clothes to reveal the mysterious mark on his skin. Upon seeing the design reflected in the mirror, the Viscount's wife turns pale with shock, recognizing the legendary mark of the 7 wings. Ash himself is astonished as he looks at his shoulder and sees that symbol stamped on his new body. At that moment, the painful memories of his past life begin to make perfect sense in his mind. He remembers when his biological father, Roderick, cruelly revealed that the only thing that really mattered was the power of the 7 wings that dwelt within him. The boy puts the pieces together and realizes that Roderick only rescued him in the blizzard back then so he could steal his magic when he grew up. That whole facade of calling him weak and wingless was just a blatant lie to hide his true selfish plan. Overcome by a deep hatred, Ash promises himself that he will take revenge on that hypocritical man who had the audacity to steal his own wings. Back to reality, the Viscountess holds him tightly against her chest, worried about the child's fate. With a serious face, Hyfried questions what they should do from then on regarding the little one. The baby tenses up, fearing they might decide to hand him over to Roderick's main branch or use him for their own interests. He knows he cannot let his magic fall into the wrong hands of the Elmheims if he wants a chance to achieve his revenge. To everyone's surprise, Hyfried firmly announces that he is going to adopt the little boy as his own son. Ash widens his golden eyes, unable to believe what he just heard from the Viscount. The man gently extends his hand toward the boy. He pats Ash's head affectionately, saying he is still like a young bird that can't even fly on its own. Hyfried smiles sweetly and declares he will take the responsibility of raising him with all his love until the day he decides to fly on his own. Moved by that unexpected demonstration of real kindness, little Ash's eyes fill with tears. Suddenly, a loud noise interrupts the emotional moment as one of the couple's daughters falls face first onto the floor while trying to spy through the door. Hyfried notices the mischief and asks humorously if the girls were listening to the conversation the entire time. Embarrassed, the little girls stand up and make excuses, saying they were just very worried about the little baby's well-being. One of the daughters runs excitedly toward her mother to get closer to her new little brother. Curious, another girl asks what official name they will give to the child. The Viscountess smiles with tenderness and decides it is time to give the little one a worthy name. She lifts him toward the moonlight and names him Aster, after a bright new star that has just been born into their family. 10 years pass in the blink of an eye, and the family carriage arrives at the imposing courtyard of a major nobility event. The local guards bow respectfully to greet the arrival of Lord Highfried. The carriage door opens, revealing the silhouette of a young man preparing to step down. Now much taller and wearing elegant attire, the young MC steps out, exuding the calm and imposing posture of a swordsman. He turns gentlemanly to help his sister Alphin, asking her to be careful while stepping down from the carriage. The beautiful girl with pink hair smiles radiantly and thanks her brother for the kind gesture. The two walk side by side with elegance, drawing everyone's attention right at the entrance of the event. They are there to participate in the prestigious sword dance assembly. This event is an annual social gathering organized by the great houses of noble warriors of the Elmheim family, serving to strengthen bonds of influence. But beyond politics, the assembly functions as a true exhibition stage for the most promising young swordsmen to show off their skills. As the Viscount's group enters the main hall, silence spreads and all eyes turn directly toward them. The nobles begin to gossip maliciously behind their backs, mocking the Viscount's family for adopting some random boy from nowhere to be the heir. On the upper floor, intimidating silhouettes with glowing red eyes watch the scene with contempt, irritated to see the Elmheim name supposedly being stained by them. A young swordsman from the main lineage observes Aster from afar with a look of disdain that anticipates a confrontation. Alphin notices the venomous whispers and quietly asks her brother Aster to simply ignore the provocations of those insolent people. Alphin clenches her fist tightly, knowing that in that ruthless place, any show of weakness would mean their end. Noticing his sister's trembling hand, Aster observes her in silence, understanding the pressure she is feeling. Walking ahead of them, Hefrid comments soberly that this cold reception is the current status of the Viscount house before high society. The Viscount stops before the monumental hall and reveals that he made sure to bring them so they could see that reality with their own eyes. He then turns to Aster and asks if the young man feels in any way disappointed by that hostile situation. With a confident smile and glowing eyes, Aster replies no, stating that this icy atmosphere suits him perfectly. Satisfied with his adopted son's courageous response, Hefrid lets out a laugh and says that is very reassuring to hear. Aster remembers that, in his past life, he made the worst possible debut in high society, being humiliated and treated as the great disgrace of the Elmheim family. However, he knows that now everything has changed because the power of the seven wings has returned to his body and he is a completely different person. His golden eyes shine with sharp determination, ready to rewrite his own destiny. The group finally enters the grand palace where the nobility gathers for the festival. From a high window, Roderick's biological children watch the arrival of the visitors with cold, superior looks. Aster maintains his composure, totally indifferent to the silent contempt emanating from that mansion. As he walks elegantly beside his family, he mentally prepares himself for what is to come. The young man decides he will begin his new journey with a simply overwhelming debut in high society. In the festival arena, two young knights clashed fiercely before an enthusiastic crowd, marking the era when warriors dominated the world. One of the boys attacks with all his energy, focused on securing victory at any cost. In that militarized society, to be a true knight of respect, it was necessary to demonstrate both power and elegance. Power was measured by absolute mastery in sword handling during combat. On the other hand, elegance and grace were achieved through the fame and recognition of one's victories. The young warriors continue exchanging rapid blows while the crowd watches every movement closely. And there was only one undeniable symbol that proved a warrior possessed both of these divine qualities. At the climax of the contest, one of the boys manages to disarm his opponent with a precise and spectacular move. The great symbol of status and strength for a noble was, without a doubt, the prestigious crest of wings. The victor raises his weapon while the crest of wings glows intensely on his right hand, sealing his superiority. Observing everything from the balcony, Aster comments to himself that the atmosphere of that arena remains insanely noisy and intense. He thinks that now he perfectly understands the reason why his other sisters flatly refused to come to the event. It is at that moment that Aster notices the presence of some of his former tormentors staring at him with cynical smiles from afar. He recalls how he used to be beaten and humiliated on the ground by those very same nobles in his previous life. Realizing her brother's distraction, Alphen calls him with curiosity to know what caught his attention. The girl asks if he is feeling nervous, reminding him that after all, this is his first festival. Aster gives a calm smile and replies that actually no, confessing that this place brings him only a strange sense of nostalgia. Alphen stares at him confused by that enigmatic response, not understanding how a banquet like that could make him nostalgic. Hevreid interrupts the conversation to announce that he needs to excuse himself for a moment to attend a political meeting. He asks his son to look after his sister, which makes the two of them start teasing each other about who was the clumsier of the duo. With a relaxed smile, the Viscount rests his hand on Aster's shoulder and advises the young man to make friends and connections with people his age. Next, he takes a serious tone and whispers a crucial warning so that the boy never lets anyone find out about the secret of the 7 wings. The father says goodbye and walks away, leaving the 2 siblings alone in the middle of that busy hall. As soon as Hyfried leaves their side, several young nobles begin to surround the siblings with looks full of pure disdain and hostility. Faced with such explicit negativity, Aster ironically wonders how he is supposed to make new friends in such a toxic environment. Suddenly, his eyes narrow as he focuses on a specific group of people he knows all too well. Alphen notices her brother's change in posture and asks where he is going in such a rush. Without hesitation, Aster calmly replies that he is just going to make some new friends. He walks toward a sofa where Roderick's arrogant main family children are drinking and laughing loudly. The leader of the group, Darius, notices the approach and asks with total disdain who on earth that boy is. With a sharp and confident expression, Aster greets him, saying it is a pleasure to meet his dear older brother Darius. The young man officially introduces himself as Aster F. Elmheim, declaring mockingly that he is his younger brother. He explains calmly that he saw him outside and made it a point to come by personally to welcome him. Another young man lounging on the sofa points laughing at Aster, alerting Darius that this boy is just the ridiculous adopted son the Viscount's family took in. Hearing this, Darius bursts out laughing and comments mockingly that now he understands the reason why he uses the letter F in his last name without the slightest shame. Aster observes the 2 boys sitting and instantly remembers Darius and Grion, the legitimate heirs who cruelly ended him in his previous life. He reflects that back then, they seemed like terrifying and unreachable figures, but now things are very different. Looking at their arrogance on the sofa, Aster realizes they are nothing more than spoiled children playing grown-up. Suddenly, Alphen's voice calls him, interrupting his vengeful thoughts. Worried, the girl grabs Aster's arm to pull him away, insisting that they have already greeted the nobles and that it is time to leave. But Darius notices her presence and calls her sarcastically, making Alphen stop immediately with a tense expression. The heir mocks the young girl, asking if she won't need to hide behind her biological father to protect herself today. He continues the provocations in a tone of superiority, ordering her to come closer to entertain them, claiming that it is a direct order from the main house. Alphen does not let herself be intimidated, turns around furiously, and replies that the main family and the Viscount branch do not have a master and servant relationship. Seeing the tension rise, Aster tries to intervene calmly to hold the sister back before she does something reckless. Alphen tries to pull her arm away, insisting she still has some truths to drop right in the faces of those insolent people. However, Aster glares at her with a firm, silent look, signaling for her to calm down and let him take control. Darius flashes an even more sadistic and malevolent smile as he notices the anger written all over the girl's face. He then begins to spread nasty rumors out loud, reminding everyone that her father was a failed knight who failed to protect the king himself. The noble continues to mock the family tragedy, mentioning that to take the blame, the Viscount's own younger brother had to cut his arm off. He finishes by saying he thanks the heavens he doesn't carry the blood of a loser like Hyfried in his veins, leaving Alphen trembling with pure rage. Unable to bear such an offense against her father, the girl turns around out of control and demands that he take back what he said immediately. In the heat of the moment, she ends up throwing the glass of red wine she was holding directly into Darius's face. Wiping his soaked face, the boy strikes back coldly, saying the Viscount only had useless daughters who can't even inherit the title, and that he surely feels ashamed of her. With a psycho look, Darius warns that this place is no ordinary party hall, where she can do whatever she wants. In return, he pours the rest of his drink over Alphen, saying with disdain for her to wear old rags next time if she doesn't want to ruin her nice clothes. Aster observes his sister crying, soaked in wine and overcome by a terrifying calmness, reflects that he was quite worried before arriving there. Hyfried thought that upon seeing the faces of his former executioners again, perhaps he wouldn't feel any more anger in his heart. But seeing the humiliation his new sister just suffered, Aster silently picks up a whole bottle of wine from the table next to them. Looking at Alphen's tears, the young man realizes that deep down, he is very happy to discover that his desire for revenge remains more alive than ever. With extreme coldness, he draws Darius's attention while raising the glass bottle over the boy's head. The main heir looks up, not understanding what is about to happen. Thinking that Darius remains the same arrogant garbage as always, Aster decides it is time to act. Without any hesitation, he pours the entire bottle of red wine directly over the noble's head, leaving him completely drenched and in shock. Aster calmly rests his hand on the hilt of his sword, while Darius's other brother screams desperately upon seeing the scene. The boy tastes the red liquid from his fingers and comments mockingly that it's nothing more than simple, bland grape juice. He looks directly at the heir with a provocative smile, saying that drink perfectly matches a spoiled, weak noble like him. Aster then remembers an incident that occurred 3 years ago, when an overwhelming golden magical explosion almost destroyed everything around him. Back then, Alphen cried desperately while holding her passed-out sister in her arms, begging her to hold on somehow. Hefri tried to control the chaos at all costs, shouting for all his daughters to keep calm in the face of imminent danger. The Viscount finally understood the true destructive magnitude of the power of the 7 wings that dwelt within his adopted son. He questioned whether such an overwhelming and dangerous energy could actually be controlled by anyone. Hefried looked at the young Aster in a trance and wondered if he would be able to master that absurd power on his own. Back to the present, a guard bursts into the meeting room in a hurry, interrupting Hefried's private meeting with urgent news. The Viscount reacts irritated by the sudden interruption, reminding him that they are right in the middle of an important diplomatic conversation. Completely out of breath, the soldier reveals that the children of the main house and the Viscount branch had decided to start a sword duel in the arena. Both Hefried and Roderick are in absolute shock upon receiving that unexpected news. Wasting no time, the Viscount stands up from his chair and immediately runs toward the festival hall. He finds Alphen running desperately in his direction and immediately asks what on earth happened for things to reach that point. A robust, bearded noble nearby points with a sadistic smile toward the palace balcony, suggesting they see it with their own eyes. Looking down, they come across Aster and Darius wielding their swords in the center of the arena, about to start an internal fight rarely seen in the Elmheim dynasty. Alphen watches everything with extreme worry, while the bearded noble comments that the outcome of that dispute will dictate the direction of the family. Other influential nobles also watch the start of the confrontation with enormous curiosity and anticipation. The bearded man strokes his chin and smiles darkly, predicting that this duel at the sword dance assembly might end up becoming a total mess. In the center of the arena, Darius raises his sword, glowing with crimson magical energy, laughing insanely at the thought that an adopted stray like Aster will never understand the true difference in power between them. Before everyone in the hall, Darius proudly raises his sword to display his 4 wings crest, leaving the crowd impressed by the level of power of the ducal heir. With a sarcastic smile on his face, the young man taunts Aster and challenges him to show his own crest as well. Darius continues to mock and asks if he became too embarrassed to reveal his mark after seeing the grandeur of his own, but Aster only finds humor in that display of pride over a simple pattern on the skin. With a bright look and a calm smile, the MC replies back that he would never have the nerve to do something so embarrassing. Hearing that sassy response, Darius becomes completely furious, his eyes glowing with hatred over the insult. Before they begin, Aster proposes that the loser apologize to his sisters, while his cousin accepts the duel, demanding that if he wins, Aster must become his lapdog. The heir of the main house charges with fury against the MC, shouting that he will make him work like a slave for the rest of his life. The swords of the two collide violently in the center of the arena, throwing off bright sparks from the impact. Aster manages to dodge the initial attack and takes a defensive stance as dust rises around him. The young man steadies the hilt of his weapon, feeling the heavy pressure generated by his opponent's blow. Totally confident, Darius prepares his two swords enveloped in a red aura, boasting that this is the true power of someone who possesses a crest. He begins to deliver fast and aggressive strikes one after another, forcing the MC to block each one of them with determination. From the palace balcony, Alphen watches everything extremely distressed and screams Aster's name, fearing he might get hurt. The bearded warrior with black hair observes the combat from up there and comments with crossed arms that Darius' swordsmanship is still quite immature. He ponders, however, that even with the weak technique, the overwhelming amount of mana generated by a wing's crest is more than enough to make up for any flaw. The warrior mentally explains that if the mana of a single wing is like a candle flame, the power accumulated in 4 wings is immeasurable. In the arena, Darius continues his violent attacks with a maniacal smile, unleashing energy slashes that look like literal explosions. He mocks the MC during the combat, asking where all that tough talk he was showing minutes ago went. Aster merely defends against the blows. The main heir continues provoking and asks if the promise to make him apologize was just empty talk. Darius then leaps into the air, concentrating all his strength, and orders his cousin to finally show his true power. Watching from the crowd, Grian cracks a smug smile, thinking the confrontation has already been completely decided right then and there. Darius' blade comes down in a devastating attack, glowing intensely toward his opponent. To everyone's surprise, Aster manages to block the blow perfectly, generating a massive collision of colorful energies. Darius widens his eyes, unable to believe that his strongest attack was stopped so simply. With a cold look and his yellow eyes glowing amidst the energy, Aster calmly says his cousin talks too much. He pushes his opponent's sword aside with a potent strike, coated in a golden aura. The MC steadies himself on the ground as a torrent of golden energy begins to emanate from his entire body. Aster reflects that he spent the last 10 years learning to perfectly control his mana at the Viscount's house, just waiting for the ideal opportunity to get back at them. With determination in his eyes, he raises his weapon enveloped by a bright yellow flame to begin his counterattack. The MC leaps and delivers an overwhelming blow that makes Darius groan in pain as he tries to defend against the wave of golden energy. Under the violent impact of the attack, Darius' leg gives out and he is forced to kneel on the arena floor. Seeing the scene from the crowd, Green is horrified to realize what is happening to his older brother. He panics upon seeing that Darius is being completely pushed back by Aster's crushing strength. The main heir tries to resist with gritted teeth, unable to accept that he is losing despite possessing the power of 4 wings. The MC merely looks down on him with a gaze of total coldness and contempt. In the crowd, the other young nobles are shocked and comment among themselves that Darius is being unilaterally dominated. The spectators cannot hide their astonishment upon discovering that the Viscount branch of the Elmheim family was still hiding such a powerful warrior. Aster prepares to deliver the final blow as his energy intensifies terrifyingly around him. Observing the situation from the balcony, Viscount Highfried notices the danger and murmurs worriedly that the situation is getting bad. Faced with the terrible pressure of the imminent attack, Darius begins to sweat in absolute terror. In that moment of tension, a dark memory surfaces in Aster's mind, recalling when his cousin laughed sadistically while taking his arm in his previous life. Overcome by a silent fury and a thirst for revenge, the MC's face turns dark as he releases an absurd amount of power. Totally terrified by the murderous presence before him, Darius begins to beg desperately for him to stop. From up there, Alphen also screams desperately, begging Aster not to do something reckless. Ignoring the cries, the MC delivers an extremely violent slash that causes a colossal explosion of light and smoke in the arena. The bearded warrior watches the outcome of the attack with a serious and surprised expression, arms crossed. When the dust finally begins to settle, Aster's sword appears embedded in the ground, just inches away from his opponent. Fallen on the ground and trembling with terror, Darius realizes he ended up wetting his own pants out of sheer fear, while Aster comments with disdain that he should have come with old rags. Looking at his cousin with deep contempt, the MC adds sarcastically that he should wear clothes he doesn't mind getting wet. As he calmly sheathes his sword under the watchful eyes from the balcony, the young man mentally declares that he is no longer that wingless ash from the past. On the balcony, Alphen finally manages to breathe a sigh of relief with the end of the fight, while feeling her father's comforting hand on her shoulder. Aster gives a serene smile to his sister, feeling that this minor victory is already enough to calm his thoughts for now. Suddenly, the MC's golden eyes widen as he senses a terrible and crushing threat coming from behind. A deafening crash echoes through the hall as a massive wave of dark red energy begins to spread, drawing the attention of everyone present. Aster quickly turns around in absolute alert, realizing that a terrifying presence has just entered the room. At the top of the staircases appears an imposing man enveloped in a red aura of pure fury and hostility. Aster immediately recognizes the man with the intimidating gaze as Roderick, the dangerous leader of the main Elmheim family. As he descends, the guests around begin to whisper in shock that a mere Viscount's son actually managed to defeat the direct heir of the main house. The nobles comment apprehensively that the situation has turned into a real mess because the Duke will never let it slide to see his family's honor dragged through the mud like that. Aster keeps his guard up and observes with extreme seriousness the slow and heavy approach of his uncle. Fallen on the ground, Darius lets out insane laughs upon seeing the arrival of the powerful leader of the main Elmheim house, believing his salvation has arrived. Roderick stands right before the MC, looking down on him with deep, silent contempt. The Duke's gaze is cold and merciless, demonstrating that he will accept no type of insolence against his lineage. Aster holds his uncle's gaze firmly, even while feeling the massive spiritual pressure emanating from the man. Duke Roderick ignores the boy for a moment as Darius crawls humiliated across the floor toward his father's legs. The defeated heir desperately grabs his father's robes, begging for help. Pointing with hatred at the MC, Darius shouts that this filthy half-blood had the audacity to challenge the main family's authority. He cries with rage and begs for his father to use all his immense power to crush Aster right then and there. To everyone's astonishment, Roderick simply steps with extreme brutality onto his own son's injured hand, cracking the stone floor with the impact. Darius screams in absolute agony as he feels his bones being crushed under his father's heavy boot. The crowd of nobles watches that scene of extreme cruelty in complete shock and silence. Green observes the merciless punishment suffered by his brother and stands paralyzed with pure terror at his father's behavior. With total coldness, Roderick says a loser who can't even take revenge on his own has no right to laugh or even wield a sword, having only stained the family name. Seeing the gravity of the situation, Hefried shouts desperately from the balcony, demanding his brother stop that immediately. Ignoring the plea, the Duke draws his weapon with a murderous look to put a definitive end to his own useless son. He delivers a fast and lethal strike toward the fallen boy. Aster reacts instantly, moving with surprising agility to intercept the deadly attack. The MC uses his own sword to block Roderick's blow, saving his cousin's life under the Duke's surprised gaze. Protecting his trembling cousin behind him, Aster calmly argues that Darius still hasn't apologized to his sister. With his golden eyes glowing intensely, he asks his uncle to postpone his son's punishment until he fulfills the duel agreement. Roderick releases an even heavier aura and asks mockingly if some random orphan taken in by Hefried actually considers himself a legitimate member of the Elmheims. Without backing down a single step, Aster proudly declares he is the Viscount's son and that he learned from his father about a knight's pride and the weight of carrying that last name. The Duke stares at the boy in silence for a brief moment while the nobles on the balcony watch the unfolding of that tense conversation apprehensively. Next, Roderick states threateningly that the boy's audacity has brought unacceptable shame to the main family's honor. On the upper floor, the bearded warrior with dark hair follows everything with a serious and focused posture. One of the influential nobles comments in a worried tone that this incident has already gone past the limit of a simple kid's fight. Another young noble with blue hair agrees, observing that Aster himself must be fully aware of the gravity of his actions. Aiming at the Viscount on the balcony, the Duke reminds him that Hayford had to sacrifice his own arm in the past as compensation for his disloyalty. Roderick presses the tip of his sharp blade directly against the MC's neck and asks coldly what the boy intends to offer in exchange for that offense. Even with imminent danger touching his skin, Aster maintains his calm and answers his uncle with total respect. The young man firmly explains that this was no mere family squabble, but a legitimate duel where he only used his sword to defend his house's honor from the insults suffered. The Duke glares at him, his red eyes glowing in fury, waiting to see how far the boy's audacity goes. Astor then uses his uncle's own words against him, stating that he has no intention of losing even a single finger, since those who cannot defend themselves do not deserve to carry a weapon. Alphen grips the balcony railing so tightly that her hands tremble with pure terror for her adopted brother. The young noble with blue hair lets out a sarcastic laugh, finding it unbelievable that a boy of only 10 years old possesses so much determination and courage. Roderick stares at the MC in absolute and extremely tense silence for a few seconds. He finally pulls back his weapon with an unreadable expression, murmuring that he understands the boy's position. In a swift motion, the Duke takes a firm step forward and coldly orders the boy to take his combat stance. Astor is caught completely by surprise by his uncle's sudden and violent reaction. He barely has time to react before seeing the blade of the main house leader advance against him with terrifying speed. A devastating explosion of white energy and dust consumes the center of the arena after the terrible clash of forces. On the balcony, Alphen watches the scene terrified and covers her mouth with her hands, fearing for her brother's life. Overcome by fury, Viscount Hyfried pierces the air with a deafening shout, calling out his own brother Roderick's name. The Viscount leaps directly from the palace balcony with his sword drawn to intercept the Duke's relentless attack. Hyfried collides his blade with brutal force against Roderick's weapon, preventing him from finishing the MC. After the violent clash of swords, the Viscount backs away, sliding across the arena floor as he takes a defensive stance. He runs desperately through the clearing smoke, shouting to know if Astor is truly all right. When the dust finally settles in the damaged arena, the trail of destruction left by the confrontation is revealed. Looking forward, Hyfried widens his eyes in absolute shock at the state he finds his adopted son in. Astor remains standing in the middle of the rubble with his sword drawn, but with his body clearly exhausted and battered. With a bloodied face and a cut forehead, the boy holds his gaze, his yellow eyes glowing with a savage intensity. Impressed by the boy's resilience, Roderick glares at him for one last second before turning his back coldly. The Duke withdraws from the arena in silence, his cape billowing, followed closely by Darius, who walks with his head down. Hyfried immediately runs to the MC's side as soon as the immediate danger pulls away. The Viscount supports Astor's staggering body as he begins to lose strength after demanding so much of himself. With a weak smile on his bloodied face, the boy whispers to his adopted father that he managed to fulfill his promise and keep his word. With eyes tearing up with emotion and pride, Hyfried comforts his son and says he was simply magnificent in that combat. Roderick and Darius walk up the palace stairs under the watchful and silent eyes of the festival's noble guests. The bearded warrior with black hair approaches and comments with a smile that the Duke's attitude against the boy was quite childish. Roderick strikes back, saying that if they let the boy say whatever he wanted, the main family would totally lose face, concluding that that was the ideal outcome. The bearded warrior reflects that the youth actually faced the Duke himself and survived, proving to be a true rising star. The chubby noble agrees, commenting that that was the best social debut the boy could ask for, though he confesses to being terrified by the possibility of an internal war. With a serious and dark look, the Duke internally ponders that an era of great turbulence will eventually arrive. While Hyfried and Alphen tend to Astor's injuries in the hallway, Roderick predicts that a terrible storm capable of ripping the world to pieces is about to begin. Sometime later, under a blue sunny sky, the training yard of the Viscount's house bustles with the activity of soldiers watching a combat. Astor easily knocks down one more recruit onto the sandy ground with the help of his wooden sword. The defeated young soldier flashes a friendly smile and praises the MC's splendid technique. Another training partner approaches to speak with him, calling him respectfully young Master Astor. The guards around whisper, impressed by the terrifying ability of the boy of only 10 years old, commenting that his training has gotten even more intense since they returned from the sword dance assembly. One of them adds that he heard the boy single-handedly defeated the third son of the influential Duke Roderick in the capital. The soldiers celebrate the feat, remembering that the main house always looked down on them, making that victory an extremely refreshing story to hear. While resting his wooden sword, Astor reflects that he managed to demonstrate enough power and presence during the nobles' assembly. Hefried ponders that this should silence those who mock the Viscount's house, but knows full well that the true obstacle is still the main Elmheim family. Delivering fast strikes in the air, the young man confesses to himself that he wished he could have tested the limits of his true strength that day. He presses another recruit against the wall during practice, regretting not being able to keep testing himself on the festival's main stage. Remembering his uncle's immense power, the boy frustratedly recognizes that at his current power level, he could never defeat Roderick in a real combat. Aster reflects that the wing's crest serves only to indicate the initial level of hidden magical power, and that natural talent turns to garbage if the user doesn't know how to master it. A massive projection of golden flame surfaces in his thoughts as he regrets still not being able to release the hidden power of the 7 wings. He continues delivering swift wooden strikes, wishing he could test his wings' power at will without having to worry about losing control of his own mind. His yellow eyes shine with determination as he maintains total focus on his physical improvement. Suddenly, the boy points his wooden sword directly forward, challenging whoever it may be to face him. Observing the row of recruits fallen on the ground from exhaustion, he asks in a challenging tone if there is no one else willing to fight him. A familiar female voice echoes behind him, commenting humorously that he keeps overdoing it in his daily training. Aster turns around and finds Alphen dressed in a tight training outfit, warning him that he truly has no limits and that their father is calling for him. The MC agrees to go immediately see the Viscount as he walks toward his sister among the soldiers fallen on the ground. Aster stares at her intrigued and comments with surprise on the choice of clothing she decided to wear that day. Alphen looks at her younger brother curiously, not understanding the reason for so much astonishment. The MC confesses it is rare to see her wearing that outfit, remembering that she always said she hated combat gear because she didn't find it one bit cute. With a slight blush on her cheeks, the girl gestures and explains that balance is key in everything, and that seeing him fight at the assembly made her realize that she can't remain weak either. Alphen quickly raises her wooden sword toward her brother's face with a mischievous smile, leaving him surprised by the sudden challenge. Alphen smiles knowingly and warns that as soon as he returns from the talk with their father, he will have to spend a lot of time training together with her. Aster cracks a joyful and relaxed smile at the cute intimidation of his dear older sister. Laughing at the situation, the MC gladly accepts the challenge and playfully asks for her to go easy on him. Shortly after, the young man walks to Hayfried's office and knocks politely on the door before entering. Opening the door, Aster asked for his adopted father's permission, who was already waiting for him comfortably, seated in his armchair. The boy asks if the Viscount wanted to speak with him, and Hayfried, with a serene look, motions for his son to take a seat. Aster sits on the office sofa, curious to find out what matter was so important that his father wanted to discuss. In a nostalgic tone, Hefried begins the conversation by asking if it has really been 10 years since they warmly took him into that house. The Viscount confesses with sincerity that he intended to wait until his son was a bit older, but feels the right moment has finally arrived. He places a beautiful ring, adorned with a brilliant red gem on the table, leaving the young man intrigued as to what that could be. Hefried solemnly reveals that this jewelry represents the legitimate proof of who will be the next leader of the family. Aster widens his eyes in absolute silence upon hearing his father declare in plain words that he wants him to be the official successor of the Viscount house. The Viscount explains that, as his son well knows, the secondary branch family currently finds itself in a rather delicate position at court. He argues that despite the flaws, they are still an important branch that carries the prestigious Elmheim last name, and that, as lords, they have the sacred duty to protect their own territory. Hefried emphasizes that he cannot leave the post of heir vacant forever, reinforcing the urgency to name his legitimate successor. Worried about family harmony, Aster immediately asks if his sisters would really be on board with that major decision. Hefried calms the young man down by explaining that his sisters, who are currently studying at the renowned Knight Academy, will return home in just 3 days, and that he intends to talk openly with all of them when they arrive. Upon hearing the announcement, Aster recalls his older sisters, Martha and Kudo, and wonders if they will really accept the news with open arms. The MC smiles nervously out of the corner of his mouth as he imagines that the two will certainly not be happy with the news, predicting that the temperamental Kudo will be absolutely furious. Hefried sighs heavily, remembering that his daughter indeed deeply resents him just for the fact that he was born male and was blessed with the legendary power of the 7 wings. Aster suddenly stands up with a serious expression and vehemently refuses the proposal, stating that he cannot accept the post of successor under any circumstances. The young man argues that he is not even capable of mastering his own magical energy, and that he considers himself just an immature brat who almost took his own sister's life in the past. He voices his frustration that he lacks the slightest confidence that he will be able to convince his furious sisters to accept him as the future leader. Hefried flashes an affectionate smile upon seeing his son's maturity and comments humorously that there are times when he really doubts if the boy was ever actually a child. The Viscount pulls out a wooden box and explains that he initially intended to gift the young man the ring as a fair reward for his excellent performance at the sword dance assembly. However, he slides the box forward with a knowing look, commenting that he senses his son will be considerably more satisfied with the true present that is kept inside there. Aster widens his eyes in pure astonishment as he senses the massive magical aura emanating from the mysterious object. Opening the box, Hefried presents the mythical sword Graham, revealing it to be a legendary magic-devouring blade capable of helping him control the overwhelming power of the 7 wings. Shortly after, the two walk to an isolated clearing in the middle of the dense forest, where the Viscount decides the location is safe enough to perform the test. Intrigued by the trip, Aster asks his father if it wouldn't have been simpler to show the legendary weapon right in the estate's training dojo. With a drop of sweat on his forehead, Hefried humorously denies it and reminds his son that he has the terrible habit of destroying the family house quite frequently during his training. He then wields the mysterious sword and explains that the legendary Graham is a demonic relic passed down only to the firstborn sons of the Elmheims, and that he made sure to recover it from the main family, especially for the young man. The Viscount holds the hilt firmly and begins to slowly unsheathe the legendary weapon under his son's watchful eye. Aster reacts with extreme surprise upon seeing what reveals itself before his eyes. He realizes confusedly that the magical weapon simply has no metal blade attached to its golden hilt. Hefried smiles at the young man's astonishment and begins to channel his own magical energy directly into the grip, causing a colossal blade of shimmering red energy to emerge. The Viscount explains that the mythical sword functions as a blade of pure potential, completing its physical form according to the magical strength of the user themselves. In a swift motion, he delivers an overwhelming slash in the air, releasing a spectacular torrent of destructive red energy toward the forest. The overwhelming power of the slash carves a gigantic circular crater into the earth, completely devastating the surrounding trees in the blink of an eye. To his serious stance, Hefried sternly warns that the sword possesses a dark reputation, because if the magic of the one wielding it is weak or wavering, the blade will devour the user's entire life force until death. The Viscount then offers the dangerous grip to the boy and asks with a provocative smile if he would like to be the next to test it. Aster accepts the challenge without hesitation and holds the golden hilt with both hands, feeling the weight of the legendary weapon. Determined to tame the artifact, the MC concentrates his mind and begins to channel all his magical energy into the sword. A gigantic and brilliant explosion of golden light consumes the young heir's body as the energy of the 7 wings manifests with full force. Aster pierces the air with a groan of effort as he realizes startled that the demonic weapon has begun to suck his entire massive mana in a completely uncontrolled way. In the palace training yard, the soldiers who are resting interrupt their conversations upon seeing a colossal beam of red light cut through the clouds in the sky. One of the guards asks startled if that was a comet falling from space, but the other quickly corrects him, saying that, actually, something gigantic just shot from the earth toward the sky. Intrigued by the mystery, the men continue discussing what could have generated that terrifying phenomenon. Observing the trail of energy dissipating on the horizon, Alphen smiles knowingly and quietly murmurs that the one responsible for that could only be her brother Aster. Back in the forest, the MC falls sitting on the grass, out of breath and tired, but cracks a wide smile of pure excitement upon seeing the blade of red and golden energy blaze in his hands, exclaiming that that is a simply unbelievable sword. With a perplexed expression and breaking into a cold sweat, Hefried strikes back, saying that what's unbelievable there isn't actually the weapon's power. The Viscount looks at the massive crater opened in the forest and solemnly concludes that what truly astounds is the boy's own colossal strength. He seriously explains that throughout the entire history and records of the Elmheim lineage, there has never existed even a single warrior who was born carrying the Seven Wings crest. Kiffer continues his reasoning, stating that should the boy manage to completely master this legendary gift, he will one day become a swordsman capable of surpassing even him and Roderick, who possess only 6 wings. Aster absorbs those words in silence, reflecting deeply on the possibility of one day managing to surpass the terrible Duke. The Viscount, however, takes a tone of grave warning by pointing out that a power too great inevitably ends up attracting great conflicts. He warns his adopted son that the moment the world discovers he carries the legendary power of the 7 wings, things will change drastically. Hefried illustrates the situation, saying that many will feel envy and resentment, while various others will try in every way to create cruel schemes to use him as a mere political tool. Hefried adds with regret that there will also be those who view the boy as a dangerous threat and will try to eliminate him without any mercy. The father extends his calloused hand toward Aster to encourage the boy not to regret his own weakness when the hour of inevitable danger arrives. With a look full of determination and affection, Viscount Hefried tells his adopted son to focus on becoming strong from now on. Aster grips his father's hand firmly, mentally promising himself that he will never accept living a life of misery and suffering like the one he had in his past. The boy sincerely thanks the Viscount for the support and guarantees with conviction that he will perfectly master both the power of the 7 wings and the magical sword. 3 days later, in the main hall of the palace, Hefried, his wife, and Alfin gather anxiously to welcome the young ladies who have just arrived. The door opens and Kudo emerges imposing and loud with her red jacket alongside the serene Martha, announcing in a theatrical tone that the unworthy Kudrovka is finally back home. She clears her throat solemnly, preparing to make a warm greeting for the family after being away for so long. With open arms and a radiant smile on her face, the young redhead calls her younger sisters to receive a warm reunion hug from their favorite older sister. However, the 2 younger sisters walk right past her, ignoring her completely, and run to give Martha a tight hug, leaving Kudo hanging. Seeing the hilarious scene from above, the Viscountess observes that the girls didn't even pay attention to Kudo's warm greeting. The little girls justify the snub directly, complaining that their red-haired sister always messes up their hair on purpose during hugs. Kudo crosses her arms extremely indignant and retorts that a warrior who masters horsemanship with such perfection would never commit such a coarse and unrefined act. Suddenly, she turns her sharp gaze toward Alfin, who gulps as she notices her older sister's sudden attention. Wasting no time, the young redhead flies toward Alfin and squeezes her in a supplicant hug, asking if she behaved well during her absence. Alfin tries to squirm desperately out of that crushing grip, complaining and asking why she had to come bother her at that exact moment. Martha observes the mess with a calm smile and curiously asks her mother where young Aster is, noting his absence at the reception. With a slightly worried countenance, Hefried begins to explain that if she is referring to the young man, he must be busy at the moment. Hearing the mention of the boy, Kudo narrows her piercing green eyes with a sudden and enigmatic seriousness. Meanwhile, in the middle of the isolated forest, a colossal column of destructive red energy shot into the air, cutting through the wind with violence. The strong gale generated by the attack shakes the surrounding trees, while Aster supports himself on his knees on the grass and tries to catch his breath, panting heavily from exhaustion. Sweating cold and with gritted teeth, the MC frustratedly regrets that the result of his training is still far from ideal. He observes the small flame of red energy at the tip of the sword's hilt and notes that although he can shape the blade using his mana, containing it so he isn't drained consumes all his strength. Aster observes the damage to the scenery and wonders intrigued how the Viscount managed to perform that exact same technique so naturally and without any effort. Suddenly, Kudo's mocking voice echoes among the bushes, commenting sarcastically on how flashy her younger brother's training sessions have been. The MC turns around surprised and notices the presence of his sister, who complains mockingly about him not going to the palace entrance to welcome her. The young redhead flashes a provocative smile and comments ironically that the boy's attitude in ignoring her was extremely cold on his part. She continues approaching slowly and asks if they aren't worthy of his attention or if he acts like that because he considers himself special, mentioning that even at the Night Academy, everyone is talking about his deeds at the sword dance assembly. Unintimidated by the taunts, Aster strikes back at the mockery, saying he heard rumors that she has been standing out in numerous important missions, despite being just a young apprentice. He adds by pointing to his sister's chest, reminding her that she was the only one in her class to receive the prestigious Platinum Order Honorary Knight Medal that year. Kudo turns up her nose proudly and replies with disdain that that is the bare minimum expected, since otherwise she would never have the qualifications to inherit the Viscount's position in the future. However, she takes on a sharp look and asks seriously if the rumor is true that Aster formally refused his nomination for the family succession. Aster notices the tension in her voice and calmly replies that he didn't intend to spare anyone's feelings, but merely considered that he still doesn't possess the necessary qualifications to take on such a responsibility. The young redhead cracks a smirk upon hearing her brother's justification, maintaining her posture of superiority. Taking a few firm steps forward toward the clearing, Kudo murmurs in a venting tone that both Hayfried and Aster acted in a very similar way. She draws her brilliant sword and confesses with resentment that the two were extremely cruel to ignore the fact that they knew perfectly well what had always been the biggest dream of her life. Aster widens his eyes and instantly freezes as he senses the strong intent to fight emanating from his older sister's body. Without giving the boy time to prepare, Kudo executes an extremely swift horizontal slash in the air, firing a gust of cutting blue energy. The devastating energy attack passes tearing through the ground and forest trees at high speed directly in the MC's direction. Aster leaps backward at the last second to escape the devastating blow that explodes the ground where he was standing. He manages to steady himself on the sandy ground and shouts furiously, demanding to know the reason why his older sister is attacking him out of nowhere and without any prior warning. Kudo takes her combat stance with sword in hand and replies with a challenging smile that she decided to personally test her younger brother's real abilities after being away for so long. It all begins when Kudryavka smiles provocatively and warns that from now on, she is going to start fighting for real. Worried about the situation, Aster desperately asks his older sister to wait, since his legendary sword is still incomplete. Kudryavka snaps back sternly, asking if he will use that same excuse when he is face-to-face with a real enemy on the battlefield. The MC is left speechless by the lecture and wonders confusedly about facing an opponent there. She takes an intimidating combat stance and warns that a knight must act as if they are always at war, threatening to crush him if he keeps holding back. Right after, she delivers an overwhelming blow that opens a massive trail in the earth, making Aster realize startled that she is not kidding around at all. As the redhead charges from above to attack him, the young man tries to defend himself as best he can, though he mentally admits he can barely control the flow of his own magic at that moment. With no other alternative to survive Kudryavka's fury, the boy channels his magical strength with determination, aware that she will really try to ruin him if he doesn't react properly. The two swords collide with extreme violence in the clearing, generating a spectacular clash between Kudryavka's blue light and Aster's red glow. The intensity of the confrontation in the forest is so massive that it causes consecutive detonations, the impacts of which can be seen cutting through the tree canopies in the distance. Kudryavka praises the precision of Aster's movements and says she is impressed he can keep up with the pace of her blade, especially after all the intensive training she received at the Night Academy. Despite the praise, the redhead soon changes her tone and questions with disdain, what that pitiful, incomplete energy blade he's using to defend himself is supposed to be. She points out that the boy's control over mana is a total mess and presses him even harder, forcing Aster to back away with a groan of effort. The impact of the blow is so overwhelming that it throws the MC backward, causing his feet to skid violently across the forest's sandy soil. He steadies himself with difficulty and grumbles irritated upon realizing that his older sister remains relentless and merciless as she always was. In fact, Aster recalls that she always acted in that aggressive manner with him since the earliest days of his childhood. The reason for all this teasing is that, being the only boy in the Viscount's family, the MC was the only one with legitimate rights to the clan's line of succession. To make the rivalry worse, Kudryavka considered herself very special for possessing a wing's crest immensely superior to that of anyone else in that residence. She was a true storm of a sister, always looking for any pretext to call him unfair and drag him into endless duels. Faced with this whole history of pursuit, the MC concludes very directly that this girl is his natural enemy. During the exchange of blows, the young woman locks eyes with her brother with a sharp gaze and comments that his performance is exactly within what she already expected. The collision of their opposing magias reaches its peak, releasing a deafening shockwave that devastates everything nearby. Kudravka shouts with fury, written all over her face, unleashing a violent attack while stating that her brother definitely is not fit to be the next leader of the family. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Martha observes the forest through the window and asks her father if it really was a good idea to leave them alone out there. Worried, she warns that this sibling fight is so violent that it runs the serious risk of ending in a tragic way. Hevri tries to reassure her by saying that both are excellent rivals in their own way and that, despite acting recklessly, the duel would never reach a tragic outcome. Martha lets out a slight, worried sigh and quietly murmurs that she truly hopes her father is correct about the situation. Changing the subject, she inquires about the real reason Heifried summoned them back from the Night Academy with such urgency, deducing it wasn't just to debate the succession. The Viscount confirms his daughter's suspicions and reaches out to open one of the drawers of his desk. Upon seeing what her father is pulling out of the drawer, Martha widens her eyes and instantly freezes as she recognizes the document. Hifrid places a sealed official letter on the table, revealing it to be an urgent summons sent directly by the main Elmheim family. He explains that the powerful elders who command the main branch of the family are demanding to personally meet his adopted son. Martha places her hand on her chin and agrees with seriousness that this situation is extremely grave and worrying for all of them. The Viscount takes on a deeply dark countenance and warns that in the worst-case scenario of that visit, the consequences would be disastrous. With bitterness, he confesses that the main family's interference could cause them to end up losing young Aster forever. Back to the heat of the battle in the forest, Aster strikes back at his sister's taunts by shouting that she is being ridiculous since he himself formally refused to inherit the clan's leadership. The young redhead becomes even more enraged and shouts back that this uncommitted refusal of his is exactly what makes her most irritated. She delivers a violent downward strike, forcing the boy to hold the block while feeling the crushing weight of that impact. Feeling the redhead's massive strength, Aster mentally compares her to a wild troll swinging a gigantic stone mallet against him. To bear the massive pressure, he is forced to grip his sword's hilt even tighter, which begins to release intense red flames of mana. Kudryavka executes a quick spin and delivers another blue energy slash that tears through her brother's protective barrier with extreme speed. Completely cornered by her aggressiveness, Aster begs exasperatedly for her to stop a moment and finally listen to what he has to say. However, she merely flashes a sneer and accuses him of running away from his duties by refusing the family leadership. She releases an overwhelming blast of bluish energy that detonates the scenery, launching the young MC away amidst the chaos. With blood trickling from his lips after the violent impact, Aster supports himself on his knees and curses his older sister's unbelievable brute strength. Kudryavka drives her brilliant sword into the ground and begins to lecture with disdain, stating that any warrior who merely relies on swinging a regular blade is nothing more than a third-class fighter. She takes a few firm steps through the smoke and adds that those who can only control basic magic are second-rate fighters. The young redhead takes an imposing pose in the devastated clearing and decrees that a warrior can only be considered elite when they fully master the path of the demonic sword. Kudryavka lets out a long sigh and stares at the MC with deep disappointment, saying she expected much more from his performance. She finishes by explaining that the difference between their wings' crests determines the amount of mana they can manipulate, highlighting that the advantage of a single wing represents a power increase of up to 3 times. It all begins when Kudryavka admits that in terms of magical power and pure endurance, her 5 wings crest is inferior to Aster's overwhelming 7 wings power. However, she accuses him of avoiding a direct clash of strength and relying on a cowardly swordsmanship style that he loves to use so much. With a mocking smile, the young woman asks if he doesn't trust his own strength enough to achieve the ideal swordsmanship he seeks so much. She goes even deeper into the provocation by questioning if the boy actually fears losing control of his mana again, just like what happened 3 years ago. Aster is deeply shaken by the insinuation and internally wonders if he really would be afraid of the legendary power of the seven wings. He realizes he had never thought about it from that angle and begins to consider if he has been, in an unconscious way, limiting his own magical strength the entire time. The MC questions if the true reason the magical sword is so unstable is precisely the fact that he is suppressing his own energy by force. On the other side, Kudrovka grips her weapon's hilt with bitterness and confesses that Aster possesses everything she always wished to have in life. She states that if he intends to just waste this immense luck without even realizing it, then she will make it a point to take it all for herself with arrogance. Overcome by fury, the warrior charges at high speed with her brilliant blade and demands at the top of her lungs that her brother hand over all his power to her. Faced with the imminent attack, Aster positions himself firmly and holds the hilt of Graham without any hesitation. The devastating clash between the two magias generates a colossal explosion of energy that tears the ground and violently shakes the entire forest around. Kudrovka widens her eyes in complete shock upon realizing that her younger brother was able to repel her full-force attack directly. Displaying a confident smile and with his eyes glowing golden, Aster thanks his older sister, saying that thanks to her taunts he finally woke up. The redhead is perplexed to see that the boy went on the offensive at high speed without even manifesting a physical energy blade on his golden hilt. She tries to understand his strategy, knowing perfectly well that it would be impossible for the boy to have run out of magical energy after the previous clash. However, Aster is focused on releasing all the inexhaustible and dormant energy that resides in the absolute power of his seven wings. Instead of maintaining the constant shape of the blade, the MC concentrates all his magic at once at the exact split second of impact to deliver an overwhelming slash. Seeing the boldness of the plan, Kudryavka cracks a savage smile and recognizes that her foolish brother actually managed to dream up a good combat strategy. Aster reflects that he has no intention of wasting the second life he received so unexpectedly. He decides that this same determination goes for the absolute control of the legendary power of the seven wings that shines intensely on his back. The young man recalls that in the past, regardless of how much he conquered with his sword or his new family, he still felt a deep emptiness as if he possessed nothing real. Midst the heat of combat, Kudrovka is intrigued to hear her brother's whisper about living a second life and stares at him with strangeness. Without giving time for more questions, Aster advances and delivers his decisive blow, causing the red energy to explode against his sister's defense. He executes a spectacular acrobatic move in the air after the slash, demonstrating total control of his physical agility. Kudryavka lets out a gasp of surprise upon realizing that something totally unexpected happened to her own energy weapon. She looks at her hands horrified and notes that her bluish blade simply began to dissipate completely in the air. Aster catches his breath and seriously declares that from this moment on he is not going to hold back in any training session anymore. The redhead stands paralyzed with terror, her eyes wide with pure fear before the massive, intimidating aura her younger brother emanates. The MC finishes his attack with an imposing downward slash, while his eyes shine with an implacable determination. Suddenly, Kudrovka wakes up startled and out of breath in a soft bed, realizing that all of that had ended. She looks around confused by the sunlight streaming through the window and realizes she is back in the safety of her own room. At that moment, Martha approaches her bed and comments with a serene smile that her sister finally decided to awaken from her long sleep. Martha opens the curtains to make the room brighter and says in a friendly tone that the redhead certainly took quite a while to wake up. Still dazed, Kudryavka quickly sits up and desperately asks what happened to the final outcome of the duel against Aster in the forest. Martha smiles with tenderness and reveals that their younger brother carried the redhead on his back the entire way back to the palace. She explains that Aster told everyone his sister had simply fallen asleep in the middle of training due to extreme exhaustion from her long trip. Kudrovka stares at the floor with a serious expression and murmurs downcast that that version of the facts told by the boy is not true. She recalls with clarity that in that last split second of the duel, she had absolute certainty that she would be cut in half by Aster's blow. However, she realized that actually the boy completely undid the energy blade of his magical sword just before the fatal impact. With that, Only the gust of wind and the residual impact of the mana passed through her body, making her understand that Aster would never try to actually finish his own sister. Kudryavka remembers the kind smile her adopted brother always displayed, even when she constantly provoked him. Even knowing his kindness, the young woman confesses to herself that she felt a real and genuine dread of perishing before that terrifying display of power. She sketches a tender smile and admits that although he is much smaller than her, he still manages to be a rather stubborn and surprising little brother. Overcome by a new wave of determination, the red-haired warrior firmly grips her weapon and asks her sister where Aster is at this exact moment. She throws the sheets aside and declares in a heroic tone that she flatly refuses to accept the inconclusive result of that duel. Kudo shouts enthusiastically that she will use her absolute maximum strength from the start next time, but Martha calmly interrupts her by revealing that Aster has already left the palace. The young redhead stops talking immediately and stares at her sister with an expression of total shock and incomprehension. Martha explains that an urgent summons from the main family arrived, addressed especially to him, and that the boy just left along with their father a few moments ago. Upon hearing that unexpected news, Kudryavka is left completely speechless, with an apprehensive countenance before the uncertainties about her younger brother's fate. Upon receiving the news by surprise, Kudryavka lets out a deafening shout that echoes through the entire palace, complaining indignantly that no one had told her anything about her brother's departure. Meanwhile, a luxurious horse-drawn carriage proceeds at a steady pace along the cobblestone road toward the main family's territory. Inside the carriage, Aster observes the landscape passing through the glass window with a thoughtful and silent gaze. Hefried breaks the silence and explains to his son that they are on their way to a meeting with the elders who back the Elmheims from the shadows formed by the former leaders of the main clan and its branches. The Viscount adds that although these influential men retired from the front lines a long time ago, they still act as true shadow rulers with immense political power. With a worried sigh, he questions the reason why the elders decided to summon the boy right now, given that they never showed the slightest interest in him since the day of his adoption. Aster maintains his calm and suggests that the probable reason for this sudden call must be related to his recent performance at the Sword Dance Festival. The MC reflects that the proud Elmheim elders value the family's reputation and honor above any wealth or life itself, despising anyone who stains that name. He recalls the cruel rumors that those who fail or embarrass the clan are usually thrown without mercy into cages of wild beasts to serve as food. Extremely surprised and tense at the dark common, Hefried inquires of his son where exactly he would have heard a story as terrifying as that one. The boy deflects with an awkward smile, saying he heard that a long time ago, and calmly adds that he is fully prepared to face exile or even a secret execution if necessary. Hefried changes the focus of the conversation and asks if his son really is absolutely sure he wanted to leave on a trip without even saying goodbye to his sisters. Aster guarantees that acting this way was the best thing to do, reminding him that his trip was already planned to happen right at the moment the sisters returned from the academy anyway. He jokes saying that Kudryavka already dislikes him anyway, so his absence will probably make the red-haired sister breathe a lot easier in the palace. He stares at the hilt of the demonic sword Gram attached to his waist and recognizes that thanks to the duel against Kudryavka, he finally began to understand how to handle the legendary weapon in a correct manner. The boy explains that now he can draw the legendary power of the 7 wings with much more efficiency and seriously asks for his father not to try to save him, regardless of what happens from then on. The young man states with conviction that he is determined to survive on his own, but Hefried strikes back, faking irritation at that empty talk of independence coming right from the youngest of the family. Suddenly, a sharp jolt hits the moving carriage, interrupting their conversation and leaving father and son on alert. Aster widens his golden eyes surprised as he looks out the window and realizes who just accosted them on the road. It is Kudryavka, who has her face pressed against the carriage glass making a pouty face, leaving the boy shocked at her presence there. Aster is stupefied as he wonders if his older sister really ran the entire way on foot just to catch up to them mid-journey. She invades the vehicle, complaining about how cruel her brother was for leaving without saying a single word to her, commenting she found out he was summoned by the main Elmheim family's great elders. Hefried tries to intervene with seriousness, reminding his daughter that taking her along to the main family headquarters is an extremely complicated and dangerous idea. The young redhead sits with crossed arms and replies that she perfectly understands that her father summoned them back precisely to look after the estate in his absence. She takes on a sharp countenance and points out that this sudden summons only proves that the family situation must be extremely delicate and worrying at the moment. Kudryavka seriously recalls Martha's terrible warning about the high possibility of Aster never being able to return from that dark territory. The MC tries to reassure his sister with a kind smile, pondering that he intends to just talk with the elders and that the only real dilemma is whether he can return home safely afterward. Kudryavka points her index finger directly at her younger brother's face and firmly declares that she hates him with all her might. While Aster stares at her confused, she begins to list the reasons for her anger, citing the fact that he is the male heir, carries the legendary Seven Wings crest, and receives all that special treatment. She continues her venting, saying she despises the fact that he is stronger than her and for acting like he's a mature adult even though he's just her baby brother. However, the young woman's expression softens and she confesses with sincerity that despite all the rifts, he still remains part of her precious family. Kudryavka emphasizes that no matter how powerful he becomes or how much he tries to fake maturity, he will always be her dear younger brother. She averts her gaze, slightly embarrassed, and says he is still too defenseless, demanding that the boy return safely so they can both have a proper rematch of their duel. With a challenging and confident smile, she warns that she is not going to allow him to come out victorious by forfeit from that fight under any circumstances. Right after, the agile red-haired warrior leaps out of the moving carriage with extreme ease, landing on her feet on the road. Aster watches her walk away through the window and wonders intrigued what the real purpose of that sudden appearance was, while Hefried comments humorously about her being quite a rival. The MC sketches a sincere smile and mentally thanks his impetuous older sister for all the affection and concern shown. As he watches the vehicle distance itself on the horizon under the golden light of dusk, Aster promises himself that he will do everything to return safely to his house. Sometime later, the carriage finally crosses the imposing iron gates of the main Elmheim estate, where the guards on standby welcome Viscount Hefried. One of the armored guards solemnly informs that Duke Roderick is already inside the palace, anxiously awaiting the arrival of both. Hefried tries to dismiss the scouts, saying he knows the way perfectly well, but the leader of the guards firmly insists that he has strict orders to escort the two together. Noticing the heavy military apparatus around them, Aster concludes with sarcasm that the Duke definitely didn't summon them just to show affection to his adopted son. However, the young heir maintains a serene and focused countenance without letting himself be intimidated by the escort's hostile atmosphere. Aster stares at the colossal structure of the main castle rising before him and feels a slight nostalgia as he recalls that it had been quite a long time since the last time he was at that location. The boy observes the young knight's training yard and mentally recalls the teachings he received in the past about the inner workings of that rigid family hierarchy. Walking through the hallways, Hefried warns his son to maintain his calm and not lose his head today, regardless of the type of provocation or insult the elders might direct at him. He bends with a drop of sweat on his forehead, murmuring apprehensively that the true problem indeed lies in the arrogance of that other faction of nobles. The Viscount asks for his son to listen very carefully and begins to reveal the identity of the dangerous person with whom they are about to meet. Meanwhile, in the yard, the recruits comment on Darius's absence, mocking the fact that it would be impossible for the young man to return to training anytime soon after having his dominant hand ruined. The Viscount catches the boy's attention once more, snapping him out of his daydreams and asking if he really is paying attention to his important words of warning. It all begins when Hefried peacefully hands over his weapon to the guards at the entrance of the Grand Hall, agreeing to the strict local rules without raising any objections. Aster mentally resolves to stay as calm as possible during the meeting, remembering the promise he made to his sister to return home safely. The massive heavy iron doors of the main hall slowly begin to swing open before the entire entourage. The guard announces in a solemn tone the arrival of Viscount Hefried accompanied by his two children, while a muffled, sarcastic laugh echoes from inside the hall. A powerful, aging voice remarks that the Viscount has finally decided to show up after an absence lasting more than 10 years. The imposing figure on the throne stares at the Viscount and refers to him authoritatively as his own grandson. Hifrid immediately drops to his knees and bows in absolute respect to greet the ancient clan leader. The Viscount greets the man, respectfully calling him his great-grandfather in front of the other prominent clan elders watching the scene from their thrones. Aster looks at the man seriously and mentally acknowledges that this decrepit figure is the true cruel monster running the shadows of Elmheim. That man is Zenith A. Elmheim, the feared sixth historical leader of the prestigious family's main branch. Gathered around him are the most important and influential political leaders operating under the clan's banner. The Proto observes the crowd and recognizes several arrogant nobles who are also present at the sword dance festival. Aster glances around the hall and notes with confusion that the powerful Duke Roderick is not present at this important meeting. Noticing the boy's restlessness, Zenith takes the floor and declares in a dry tone that the Duke is not there to receive them. The elder explains that, as commander of the knights serving directly under royalty, Roderick has no time to focus on trivial matters, leaving it to the old soldiers to handle such duties. Aster recalls that in his past life as the useless one of the family, he didn't even have the right to see these important figures up close, so he never cared much about it. However, he finds it curious that so many high-ranking nobles have gathered here without the current clan leader present, proving the immense influence Zenith still holds, even in retirement. Hifrid raises his head slightly and firmly asks what exactly those matters considered trivial are that prompted their summons. Zenith lets out another mocking laugh and replies disdainfully that the Viscount himself must have already figured out the real reason for this meeting. The elder adopts a hostile tone, pointing out that Hifrid's stray dog ended up causing immense public dishonor to the clan during the sword dance festival. Aster narrows his eyes and coldly concludes that the accusations regarding his participation in the festival would indeed be the focal point of all this hostility. Hifrid tries to intervene quickly, explaining that the current head of the house, Roderick, had already personally resolved and officially closed that entire misunderstanding. However, one of the other Elmheim elders fires back in outrage, stating that it was just a show for the public and that the family's reputation and prestige remain severely tarnished by the incident. Zenith rigidly decrees that adopting a child with no known noble origins was a colossal mistake from the very beginning. And now, since Aster dared to show his fangs to the main house, the only remaining option is to banish him for good, in addition to making an exemplary punishment out of Hifrid. Hearing the threat against his father, Aster breaks protocol and takes an impetuous step forward, exclaiming loudly that he was solely responsible for all actions at the festival. The boy stares firmly at the judges and shouts that the Viscount had absolutely no part or fault in the decisions he made. Hifrid keeps his head down and lets out a tense sigh upon seeing his adopted son's reckless attempt to protect him like that. The Proto stares at his father with a surprised expression, realizing the heavy atmosphere of helplessness dominating the room. One of the elders comments with deep disdain about the boy's total lack of manners, criticizing how a mere child would try to interrupt a serious discussion among adults like that. Zenith rises imposingly from his throne and speaks arrogantly about how the clan commands a colossal force of over 12,000 elite knights who march proudly under the legendary Elmheim crest. However, he coldly ponders that not all knights share the same loyalty or stand united in thought. The elder explains that there are many rival factions watching every leadership failure closely, with the sole objective of taking the commanding seat at the top of the clan. He points out without any hesitation that this treacherous ambition for power certainly includes some of the very advisors present in this court today. Zenith strikes his wooden staff against the red-carpeted floor and states that their priority is absolute peace, arguing there is no proof that the adopted boy won't bring ruin to the clan. Heifer's eyes widen and he freezes instantly as he senses the extreme hostility and threat emanating from his great-grandfather's words. Zenith wields an imposing magic sword glowing with a strong reddish light and asks that the Viscount remembers the tragic day he failed to protect his former lord, staining the clan's name. The ancient leader reveals without any remorse that, as direct punishment for that terrible past failure, he personally ordered Roderick to cut off Hifrid's left arm right then and there. With a look full of sadism, the feared elder demands that Hifrid use that same sword to end young Aster's life right in front of everyone. Aster is left in complete shock and freezes instantly upon realizing the unimaginable level of cruelty behind that terrible demand. To the surprise and astonishment of the entire council, Viscount Highfried stands tall and declares loud and clear that he absolutely refuses to comply with that cruel order. Hefried states with conviction and pride that he would gladly take his own life rather than harm his beloved son. Zenith lets out a cold grunt of contempt upon hearing that bold declaration of defiance from his grandson. The feared sixth leader of the clan merely strikes his wooden staff on the ground again in a monotonous fashion, preparing to announce his final sentence. Mercilessly, Zenith decrees that all of them will be executed right there, extending the terrible fate to the Viscount's wife and daughters as well. The council lets out sadistic laughs as the old leader formally decrees that the branch family led by the Viscount is officially dissolved from that moment on. Several armed knights immediately surround Hefried and Aster, pointing the sharp tips of their swords directly at bows of their necks. However, amidst the imminent execution, Aster breaks the silence boldly and asks in an ironic tone why his great-grandfather is so afraid of them. Zenith narrows his eyes, infuriated by the boy's audacity, while Aster adds how pathetic it is to see a group of powerful adults gathered together, shaking in fear before a child. The young heir challenges the court, saying that if they are so afraid of being bitten by the stray dog they adopted, then they should simply proceed with the banishment or the sentence without further ado. He grips the hilt of his sword with extreme firmness and warns with a killer gaze that if any of them dare to lay a single finger on his precious family, the consequences will be devastating. It all begins when Hefried stares at his son with an expression of total perplexity and concern at that sudden change in attitude. Aster apologizes to his father and confesses that, in the end, he really doesn't have what it takes to stay silent or obedient in the face of injustice. The armed guards draw back in fear, swallowing hard as they witness the extraordinary phenomenon beginning to manifest before their eyes. The legendary seven-winged crest glows intensely on the skin of the boy's back, emanating a terrifying and bright reddish energy. He displays the mark of absolute power before everyone present, making it clear that, from that moment on, the legendary force of his seven wings could turn against the clan itself if they persist in threatening his family. With a sharp and menacing glare, the Pruda coldly warns the elders that they should weigh their next decision with extreme caution. The feared Zenith stares at the youth in absolute shock, unable to believe that the adopted boy actually carries the mythical mark of the seven wings on his body. The advisors begin to whisper in complete panic, suggesting it must be a fake, since a crest with such immense power hadn't manifested in a human being for centuries. However, another prominent noble swallows hard and tremblingly admits that the glowing crest is, without a shadow of a doubt, the genuine mark of legendary power. Zenith regains control of his emotions for a brief moment and stares at the proto with a deeply grim countenance. The old leader asks severely if the boy understands the real and dangerous political significance of revealing that forbidden mark before the entire council of nobles. Aster responds with a confident, ironic smile, commenting that he heard the greater the number of wings on a crest, the more scared and impressed people usually get. A young noble with long bluish hair watching everything from his throne begins to laugh out loud, finding the proto's audacity extremely entertaining. He apologizes for the sudden outburst of laughter and makes a friendly gesture for the council to proceed with the tense meeting. Zenith ignores the interruption and begins to explain that, since ancient times, the winged crest has functioned as a magic-generating organ granted to humanity by legendary spirits. Due genetic inheritance, passing this extraordinary power down from generation to generation, the noble lineage managed to perpetuate their control over the kingdom. With the transmission of this divine gift, humanity was able to immensely refine and deepen its potential for magical strength over the centuries. He emphasizes that no human being has ever reached the absolute level of the seven wings, which belongs exclusively to the spiritual clan responsible for the original creation of the crests. Aster stares at the old man, intrigued, and asks directly if the elder suggesting that his true origin traces back to that legendary spiritual clan. Zenith counters solemnly that if the power of the seven wings he carries on his back is indeed genuine, the situation changes completely. Meanwhile, Hefried remains at the guard's sword point, staring at his adopted son with a look filled with anticipation and silent pride. Aster steps firmly onto the carpet and declares loud and clear that, regardless of his biological heritage, he considers himself solely and exclusively a legitimate son of the Viscount's house. He guarantees that his bloodline makes no difference whatsoever and demands to know once and for all if the Council of Elders is truly prepared to turn him into their worst enemy. The Proto points out that if he is banished from the clan, there will be countless other influential noble families eagerly competing to welcome a wielder of the Seven Wings with open arms. He shrewdly warns that a warrior with such strength in enemy hands would pose a terrible threat to the elders who already fear an internal rebellion, suggesting it is safer for them to keep him close. The advisors and elders swallow hard and break into a cold sweat, realizing the boy has indeed politically cornered them with that flawless argument. Aster continues his reasoning, reminding them that Elmheim is not a united clan, and that a violent civil war dragging down the entire kingdom is inevitable if they make the wrong choice. The Proto mentally reveals that he has already witnessed this tragic future once, and that, to ensure his family's survival, he needs to clearly identify who his allies and enemies are at this exact instant. Zenith lets out another dry laugh of disdain and asks provocatively if the boy truly believes he possesses that much political value to dictate the rules. He coldly argues that, in the end, there is still no concrete proof that the power of those seven wings is actually real or just an illusion. Displaying a defiant smile, Aster boldly replies that if they doubt his strength, they should simply try to execute him right here to test it. He reinforces the threat, making it clear that the moment the soldiers move forward, it will mark the beginning of a war of no return between them. The Proto clenches his fists with determination, knowing that although the clan could easily crush him if they acted with full force, he needs to find out if the old man will take his strategic bait. Given the immense tension in the hall, the young blue-haired count leans forward with enthusiasm, closely watching the resolution of this impasse. He stands up from his luxurious throne with a cynical smile and comments that the tense discussion is just going in circles without getting anywhere. He addresses Zenith respectfully and suggests that the best way to resolve the standoff would be to impose a practical trial on the boy to attest to his true worth. While another advisor questions the audacity of his proposal in indignation, the young Count Maze calmly responds that everyone there is dying of curiosity to witness the true power of the Seven Wings. The young man adds that the council will be able to make a definitive and much fairer decision regarding the boy's fate after seeing the result of his test. He urges the old Zenith on, stating that the residents of the greatest and most powerful warrior clan in the kingdom surely must possess a test worthy of challenging a young wielder. Aster stares at Count Maze with an analytical look and internally concludes, without a shadow of a doubt, the true intentions of that peculiar man. He realizes with relief that, through that clever and timely suggestion for a trial, the Count is actually secretly acting as his ally. Zenith lets out another dry laugh and agrees to the Count's proposal, ordering the boy to follow him immediately to the testing grounds. Walking ahead of the group, the elderly man mutters with contempt that correcting an arrogant youth who doesn't know how to behave before his superiors is also the sacred duty of a great-grandfather. Moments later, Aster holds on to the solid iron bars of a gigantic underground prison and remarks to himself about how dark and intimidating this dungeon of trials is. Zenith explains to the group that beyond that deep darkness lies a massive underground shelter connecting directly to the property's water channels. He reveals that the place used to be an emergency refuge, but now houses a terrible and bloodthirsty magical beast, decreeing that the boy's sole trial will be to defeat it in direct combat. Hefried approaches his adopted son, feigning irritation, and grumbles that he is a troublesome boy, reminding him that the initial plan was to keep the secret of the Seven Wings at all costs. The Proto opens the iron gate with a confident smile and counters that it would be impossible to hide such a flashy power forever, making this the perfect opportunity to reveal it. The Viscount assumes a genuinely worried expression and seriously asks the young man to take extreme care and not let his guard down for a single second in there. Aster guarantees he will be fine and begins to slowly descend into the dark abyss of the cage, holding on to a heavy iron chain under the watchful eyes of Hefried and Count Maze. Aster keeps his gaze sharp, while Count Maze observes him with an intriguing smile from behind the iron bars. Upon stepping onto the damp and grim floor of that dungeon, Aster notices how dark and frigid the atmosphere of the place is. However, his golden eyes glow intensely, allowing him to see perfectly even amidst the deep darkness. Suddenly, the boy's eyes widen in pure astonishment as he spots something terrible right ahead of him. From up above, great-grandfather Zenith coldly comments that he had already given another warrior the opportunity to clear his name in that very same place. He recalls with disdain that the last challenger did nothing but weep and scream desperately until the very end of his life. It is at this moment that the gigantic bluish beast emerges from the shadows, letting out an extremely menacing growl. Zenith severely warns the boy not to disappoint him, while Aster firmly draws the hilt of his sword. With the official start of the trial declared by the elder, the monstrous beast roars with fury and charges mercilessly at the prota. Aster realizes that the rumors about the monster kept in the mansion were real and even feels a slight bit of sympathy for the terrible situation his cousin Darius must have faced. He reflects on how cruel it is to be born into a family where relentless monsters infest every corner of the property. With quick and precise movements, Aster begins to masterfully dodge the giant monster's sharp claws. The spectators at the bars are completely stunned as they witness the impressive agility displayed by the young heir. Aster focuses on the fight and thinks to himself that this beast represents nothing compared to the dread he feels toward his sister Kudrovka. But the situation changes drastically when a mysterious purple mist filled with tentacles suddenly begins to sprout from the beast's body. Aster feels a chill and stares at the creature in complete shock upon noticing that bizarre and unexpected mutation. He notices that the beast's flesh is transforming grotesquely, revealing multiple glowing eyes and terrifying tentacles. The monster roars demonically, making Aster finally realize that he is facing a dreaded undead creature. Noting the true nature of the monster, Hefri desperately grips the iron bars, questioning in outrage why an undead beast is hidden in the mansion. With a grim and macabre look, old Zenith explains sardonically that the creature is deeply drawn to the scent of the end. The elder reveals that he brought the beast from underground so it would feed on remains and considered it the ideal opponent because it is immune to ordinary cuts and flames. He coldly adds that, thanks to the creature, he never had any more trouble disposing of unwanted remains. Even the imposing Roderick shows concern, tremblingly admitting that an undead creature of that magnitude would give even a veteran knight a hard time. Roderick questions if Zenith's true intention is simply to watch the heir of the Seven Wings perish there without any chance of defense. While the discussion takes place up above, Aster remains completely focused down below, coldly analyzing the combat situation. Zenith reassures the group, saying with disdain that even if the boy falls, his end might turn out to be much more convenient for the main family's plans. Count Maze merely observes the unfolding events in absolute silence through the heavy iron bars. He stares at the underground arena, waiting to see what the young prodigy who showed so much potential is truly capable of when real danger strikes. In his thoughts, the Count fervently hopes that Aster won't fall so easily to that cruel test. Aster delivers several powerful blows against the opponent, but realizes with frustration that his ordinary cuts have no real effect on the creature. The beast demonstrates an instantaneous and absurd power of regeneration, far surpassing any conventional undead he has ever seen. He steps back a few paces to dodge and begins to reason out what the definitive weakness of that type of monstrous creature could be. The Proto remembers that undead can normally only be eliminated through direct sunlight, intense flames, or purified by sacred weapons. He ponders that, without access to these purification elements, facing an undead head-on is complete madness, according to the rules of battle. However, knowing there is zero chance of backing down, Aster decides he won't resort to simple tricks if he wants to prove the worth of his 7 wings. Determined to display his true and absolute potential, the young man concentrates a massive amount of energy into his blade. He charges with everything, aiming to crush the monster using the sheer brute force of his devastating magic. The colossal impact of the attack generates a massive smoke screen and destroys part of the underground dungeon floor. Up above, Roderick falls flat on his backside on the floor, paralyzed with dread at the magnitude of that overwhelming magical power he just witnessed. The other nobles nervously grip the bars, trying to see through the dense dust to know if the creature was finally destroyed. Old Zenith merely lets out a cold, dissatisfied grunt as he stares intently at the center of the smoke. As the dust begins to settle, Aster emerges imposingly in the middle of the arena, wielding his glowing magical relic. However, the cruel elder flashes a disdainful smile and mutters that all of that was a great pity. In the blink of an eye, a gigantic claw resurfaces from the midst of the smoke and strikes Aster with a devastating surprise blow. The boy is thrown with extreme violence against the dungeon wall, letting out a groan of pure pain from the heavy impact. The terrible beast emerges completely regenerated and even more furious, advancing upon the fallen Proto. Hefried falls into total despair and screams Aster's name upon seeing his son in imminent mortal danger. However, Count Maze stops the Viscount from moving forward and coldly warns him not to make the foolish mistake of trying to interfere in the trial. Hefried stares at his ally with fury and asks indignantly if he is really demanding that he watch his own son perish while doing nothing. With an enigmatic smile, the Count merely makes a friendly gesture asking the Viscount to calm down and trust the boy's potential. Count Maze asks Hefried to watch the arena closely. He notices that the boy still holds an ace up his sleeve, while Aster rejoices upon realizing that his plan is actually working. The Proto notes with satisfaction that the monster's body seems to be a bit thinner and weaker than before after the blows. Even while down, Aster displays a defiant smile as he prepares the magical energy of his sword for the next attack. He rises quickly and delivers another precise strike, causing the dark blood of the undead to splatter everywhere. Determined, the boy shouts that he will keep attacking without stopping until that creature is completely destroyed. He initiates a relentless sequence of swift cuts, enveloping the beasts in a literal whirlwind of reddish blades. Watching the scene, Hefried is left jaw-dropped as he recognizes an extremely powerful technique he had shown his son only a single time. However, he questions whether what Aster is doing is actually something entirely different and even more advanced. The force of the blows is so devastating that the nobles watching from the stands panic as they realize the ground beneath their feet is also cracking. Facing imminent collapse, the guards begin to evacuate the council elders in a hurry to a safe location. Zenith stares into the smoke with his red eyes glowing, finally understanding the true scale of the danger. He witnesses young Aster smiling confidently at the center of that destructive tempest of 7 wings power. When the rumbling finally ceases, the survivors stand up dazed and try to comprehend what just happened. They look in terror at the destroyed abyss and realize that the terrible creature has completely vanished without a trace. Zenith remains in absolute silence, deeply impacted by the outcome of that battle. The elder reflects in surprise on how the boy managed to annihilate an immortal undead simply by engulfing it in a colossal vortex of pure magic. He realizes that the youth didn't use any refined technique, but rather such an absurd quantity and quality of raw power that it defies all logic. Zenith questions his grandson Hefried whether all of that was also part of his strategic plan. The Viscount responds honestly that even he himself is constantly impressed by his son's terrifying growth speed. At that, Count Maze approaches with a cynical smile and asks the old leader if the young man has finally passed the exam. Zenith lets out a dissatisfied grunt, admitting that he highly doubts anyone on the council would dare raise any objection after that slaughter. The Count then leans over the railing and cheerfully calls down to the boy that he has officially passed the test. He suggests that the Proto come up right away, but Aster realizes with embarrassment that the chains he would use to climb were completely pulverized during the explosion. With an awkward smile, the young man scratches his head and politely asks them to throw down a rope to help him get out of there. Sometime later, Zenith stares at the Proto from his window and asks if he is absolutely certain of his next choice. He warns that this is a unique opportunity, but Aster responds with conviction that he has not the slightest interest in the main family's succession war and only wants to avoid conflict with his cousins. The young man asserts that his rightful place is only at the branch property of the Viscountcy, making the old leader let out a dry laugh as he doubts such humility. Zenith points out that the burning ambition reflected in the boy's golden eyes is simply something impossible to hide. The elder glares penetratively at Aster and asks directly if his ultimate plan is to turn his own sword against the Elmheim clan in the future. Aster is startled by the accuracy of the guess, while the great-grandfather inquires bluntly if his true goal is to take Duke Roderick's head. Zenith laughs at the young man's tense reaction and tells him not to be so defensive, guaranteeing that he does not intend to investigate his deeper motives for now. Aster is quite confused by the response and questions why the old man would act this way, since traitors should be considered his worst enemies. The elderly leader reminds the youth that the main family is far from being a united or peaceful group. He explains that Roderick has become far too arrogant and that Astor's existence can serve as an excellent check on him, provided the young man never dares show his claws to his own great-grandfather again. Upon leaving the meeting room, Astor thinks to himself about how terrifying and manipulative that old monster of the clan can be. In the corridor, Hyfried rushes to meet him and asks about the nature of the conversation, to which Astor calmly replies that he turned down the invitation to join the main family. The Viscount's eyes widen in complete shock at that surprising revelation. It is at this moment that Count Maze slowly approaches both of them from behind, commenting in a tone of regret that such a refusal is a true pity. The Count points out that the boy's life would be much easier and more comfortable under the main branch's tutelage, while Astor glares at him and confirms his identity. The Prota asks why he offered help during the impasse, but Maze merely lets out a relaxed laugh and plays dumb. He changes the subject provocatively, saying he just felt like playing around a bit with a cheeky brat. Right after, the Count places his hand on Astor's shoulder in a friendly manner and emphasizes that, as of today, he is officially the legitimate heir of the Seven Wings before the entire kingdom. With a sharp look, he asks the boy to closely observe the reactions of the people around them. In the palace corridors, several nobles and advisors begin to whisper among themselves, greedily planning ways to use the boy as a pawn or to eliminate him before he becomes a major threat. The Count seriously warns that carrying the mark of the Seven Wings brings immense prestige, but it will also cause the number of enemies and opportunists to grow drastically. With a penetrating and suspicious look, Astor directly questions if Count Maze himself is also part of that group of opportunists. The Count stares at the boy for a brief instant with an expression of total serenity in the face of the questioning. He then smiles and explains that he serves as the director of the Knight Academy, revealing that identifying and recruiting promising young prodigies is part of his work routine. Finally, Maze playfully points at Hyfried, commenting that the boy's own adopted father does the exact same thing. Maze says goodbye with a wave and says he is looking forward to seeing Astor enroll in his academy. Astor watches him leave, intrigued, wondering if it is too early to consider the Count a true ally. At that moment, Hyfried comfortably places his hand on the boy's shoulder and suggests they head home at once. He comments all excitedly that he urgently needs to tell Astor's sisters about his phenomenal performance in the trial. The young man chuckles slightly but worries, imagining that his adopted mother will surely faint from shock when she sees all his injuries. Sometime later, at the main mansion, a knight kneels before Duke Roderick to officially report that young Darius lost his life in Xena's trial. Roderick hears the news coldly and asks what happened to Hyfried's adopted son, who had also been summoned. The knight notes with astonishment Roderick's disdain for his own biological son, but proceeds to say that he has a shocking report regarding Astor. Upon hearing the report, the Duke clasps his hands thoughtfully and concludes that the legendary mark of the Seven Wings truly resides in the adopted boy. The soldier is extremely surprised and asks if the Duke already knew about this secret beforehand. Roderick reflects with concern that the rise of such an immense power threatens to crumble the entire political balance his clan has maintained for centuries. The armored warrior then respectfully suggests whether they should take some drastic measure immediately to contain the boy. However, in a cold and calculating manner, Roderick simply orders them to leave Astor alone for now. He argues that if the Elmheim clan were to crumble because of an obstacle as small as a child, it would have fallen a long time ago. He arrogantly adds that there is no need to rush, for the legendary power of the Seven Wings will eventually belong to him. The Duke decides to let him act freely to watch from the best seat in the house how much that little boy he spared in the past can struggle before falling into his hands. Roderick recalls the day he spared the infant Astor's life while standing imposingly over his mother's fallen body in the snow. He mutters with malice and anticipation the true name of the heir of the Seven Wings, Ash. 4 years pass, and a large crowd of applicants gathers before the gates of the prestigious Dorisil Knight Academy for the entrance exam. The receptionists and examiners organize the line in a hurry, directing the young candidates to move forward right after filling out their forms. At that moment, the candidates begin to whisper excitedly upon seeing a slender young man with firm steps walking past. Some nobles doubt that he is the famous warrior from the rumors, commenting that they expected to see someone much larger and more muscular. At the registration desk, the examiner warns severely that the kingdom will not hold itself responsible for serious injuries during the test and demands a signature on the waiver. Next, he instructs the boy to display his winged crest to prove he possesses active magic before entering. The clerk begins to check the data for Aster F. Elmheim, but suddenly freezes in shock upon reading the legendary surname on the sheet of paper. The man's eyes widen, and he stares at the youth in absolute silence, unable to believe who is standing right before him. Aster explains casually that his winged mark is located in a region that is a bit difficult to show quickly. With a confident and charming smile, the young man playfully asks if he couldn't just use his own face as an entry pass. Moments later, Aster enters the busy inner courtyard of the academy, which is packed with anxious young warriors. As he walks calmly wearing black combat attire, he hears an angry shout coming in his direction. The provoker shouts from afar that he is talking exactly to him, calling him a smug-faced fellow. It is Vigar Smites, an arrogant youth who accuses him of being a country bumpkin noble who ended up getting lost and entering the wrong place. He points arrogantly to the imposing crest on the gate, emphasizing that this exam is exclusively to recruit the kingdom's elite knights. Aster just walks right past, ignoring the lecture, and coldly responds that then there shouldn't be any problem, leaving the young man instantly furious. Vigar yells that everyone present there went through brutal training for years to earn that great professional opportunity. He points disdainfully at the small-sized golden sword at Aster's waist, mocking that such a weapon is fit for a child. He makes a shooing gesture with his hand and tells the prota to go right back to his parents' house if he only came there for a stroll. From afar, other candidates comment laughing that Vigar is putting on his annual little show of intimidating and tormenting the rookies. However, one of them narrows his eyes and realizes with terror that the victim of the humiliation is none other than the famous youth from the Elmheim clan. Upon hearing the whispers mentioning the legendary Aster of the Seven Wings, Vigar freezes instantly and swallows hard in pure panic. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echo through the courtyard, and a sarcastic voice catches everyone's attention by greeting Aster as his beloved cousin. Aster looks away with disdain, immediately recognizing the unpleasant voice that has just interrupted them. It is Grian, the arrogant orange-haired cousin who feigns friendliness while greeting him before the crowd of onlookers. He spews his venom with a cynical smile, mocking the fact that nobody knows about the prota's real origins of birth. Aster remains unfazed by the insult and fires back ironically, commenting that he was very sorry to hear about Darius's tragic end. The redhead gestures with absolute contempt and coldly asserts that a disgrace to the clan like Darius deserved to perish anyway. Grian adds that his older brother was just an annoying nuisance who liked to give orders and act bossy just because he was a year older. Next, he approaches Aster intimidatingly and dismisses the Seven Wings rumor as if it were a silly lie. The young man whispers menacingly that Aster shouldn't underestimate the main family's power, since there will be no one inside to protect him. Seeing both of them depart silently, the other candidates comment dejectedly that this year's exam participants indeed won't stand a chance against the monsters of Elmheim. Vigar swallows hard and breaks into a cold sweat upon realizing that the power struggles between the main family and the branch lines are still at war. He approaches Aster with his hands together in a flattering manner, hesitantly asking if the young man is indeed that famous warrior. Aster merely glares at him with his golden eyes and a totally calm and passive expression. Next, the prota flashes a friendly smile to completely diffuse the young man's immense tension. He extends his hand in a friendly gesture and says the young man can just call him Aster. At the first exam location, the instructor welcomes everyone from atop a large tower, exalting the patriotism and superiority of the kingdom's knights. The man shouts with fervor that their sole and glorious duty is to serve and protect the king above all else. The candidates listen intently as he proclaims that they must be sharp swords ready to risk their lives, not foolish and blind weapons. The instructor orders everyone to treat today's exam as a real battlefield to prove their true worth. Aster finds that fiery speech to be complete nonsense, but rejoices at finally managing to return to that place. He recalls that in the past, the right to follow the path to becoming a knight of the kingdom was denied to him for the simple fact that he did not possess magical wings. The boy knows that beyond that test lies a world of relentless warriors dominated by the man who reigns at the top, Commander Roderick. With burning determination, Aster mentally vows that he will reach and surpass Duke Roderick very soon. However, he knows that to achieve his future goals, he must first successfully pass this rigorous selection. Without giving any time for rest, the examiner extends his arm and gives the signal to start the test by unleashing a downpour of gigantic spears. In the very first second of the test, an unlucky candidate is brutally struck by one of the spears falling from the sky. Panic spreads rapidly as the examiner formally announces the start of the Cruel Tower test. He declares that the only winners will be those who manage to remain standing and survive until the end of the storm of attacks. The youths scream desperately as they try to dodge the sharp tips plunging down at an absurd speed. Several candidates begin to run in panic, realizing they will be finished if they keep standing in the same spot. A group of more experienced warriors quickly unites in a defensive formation to try to block the deadly projectiles. Watching from up above, the instructor smiles with satisfaction, noticing that the veterans who have already repeated the exam know exactly how to react. However, he coldly ponders that even with those defensive tactics, the test survival rate is usually only 30%. The man knows that superficial defenses like those will soon reach their limit against the unceasing bombardment. He mentally explains that the Academy's true goal with that extreme trial is something else. They want to witness the overwhelming problem-solving capability that only true wielders of a wing crest can demonstrate. While fleeing desperately, some candidates stare at Aster in horror, questioning if the boy simply froze out of fear. Observing from afar, his cousin Grion flashes a wicked smile and hopes Aster gets turned into a pincushion of spears. But with total tranquility, Aster places his hand on the hilt of his sword, Graham, accumulating an enormous amount of mana. In a swift and precise motion, he raises his glowing blade, generating a powerful whirlwind of reddish slashes. The candidates around him are left in complete shock as they witness the colossal shockwave expanding through the courtyard. With a confident smile, Aster challenges the storm of spears to come at him with everything as he blocks every single attack without the slightest effort. He creates a literal spinning shield of magical energy that shreds all projectiles attempting to approach him. One of the warriors observes the scene open-mouthed, questioning what kind of bizarre monster would be capable of doing that. The young man is left in complete shock upon noticing that absolutely no spear can even get close to the prota's body. The examiner watches everything impressed, realizing that Aster is rotating his released mana to create a perfect wind barrier. He comments startled that the youth seems to be literally enveloped and protected by an impenetrable tempest of energy. When the bombardment finally ceases, the survivors begin to stand up trembling and ask if the nightmare is truly over. The instructor analyzes the courtyard and notes that the number of survivors was much higher than he had initially planned. He congratulates the young survivors coldly and commands everyone to look at the number of fallen bodies around them. The man declares loud and clear that everyone who managed to remain standing is officially approved for the first phase. Without giving the wounded any time to catch their breath, the examiner orders everyone to follow him immediately to the next stage. Vigar grumbles angrily about how merciless and rigid that academy instructor is. Vigar pants with exhaustion after the rain of spears, while Aster approaches with a light smile and asks if he's already tired. The young man stares at the prota in disbelief, questioning indignantly how he can look so calm and without a single scratch. From up above, the gaze of the experienced instructor remains fixed on the mysterious figure of Aster. He's impressed by the immense amount of energy released by the youth without showing any fatigue, eager to see him fight in the next round. Amidst the crowd of approved candidates, Grian walks with a deeply grim and calculating expression. He recalls the harsh words he heard before departing, warning him about the importance of his secret mission at the academy. Brian stares at Aster from afar with fury in his eyes, determined to fulfill the order to stop his cousin from becoming a knight of the kingdom at all costs. To ensure total equality in the next stage, the instructors begin to distribute identical swords to all participants. Vigar finds the weapon swap extremely bothersome, while Aster wonders if the exam rules were different in previous years. The young man pants with exhaustion and comments that there isn't much technical difference between the swords that mid-level knights usually carry. He suggests that, in reality, the examiners might be cautious about that peculiar golden sword the prota carries. Aster merely stares in silence at the new standard sword he received, analyzing the weapon's balance. Rian approaches again with disdain and mocks, saying that Aster has already managed to bring his own subordinates under control. Vigor reacts furiously to the provocation, but Grian quickly interrupts him, reminding him snobbishly that he is just the humble heir of Baron Smythe's house. He coldly warns the young man that he will bitterly regret it if he decides to wag his tail for the wrong person. Frightened by the threat from the main family, Vigor begins to bow and flatter Grian, begging him not to take the situation the wrong way. Aster merely watches that ridiculous scene, sighing at the sudden change in the area's atmosphere. He notes with displeasure how the mood among the young candidates has become extremely unpleasant and tense in that clearing. The instructor shouts to get everyone's attention and announces that the second test will be a siege battle where they will be split into 3 teams. He explains that the groups must compete fiercely to conquer enemy territory inside that forest. The examiner points out that a base is captured by hoisting the team's flag on the mast, with the group that dominates the most territories by dusk winning. He gives a chilling warning that, furthermore, there will be no restrictions or punishments should they decide to injure or even finish off the rivals. Right after, the instructor displays the colored ribbons and begins to announce the official team assignments for each member. Grian and other prominent nobles observe the team divisions, already planning their secret strategies for the battle. Aster receives his blue ribbon and gazes at the horizon calmly alongside his new teammates. The firing of a smoke signal into the skies officially marks the start of the bloody second phase of the selection exam. Aster analyzes the rules mentally, remembering that to come out victorious they will need to secure control of at least 2 of the 3 bases. Vigor points out with concern that only one of the 3 teams will achieve definitive approval in that harsh trial. The other teammates tremble in dread as they realize this means they will have to face the terrible Grian in direct combat of life or death. The Prota stares at them curiously and confusedly, not immediately understanding the reason for so much panic. Vigor sighs in defeat and admits that Aster has no idea of the paralyzing fear ordinary warriors feel. He tremblingly confesses that everyone is terrified of the inevitable and violent retaliation from the Elmheim clan should they dare fight against them. He explains that pointing a sword at the young heir of the main family would ruin their reputations as future knights forever. Vigor adds horrified that in the worst-case scenario, the Elmheim clan could wipe out entire families just out of revenge. Aster asks if they intend to give up on the test right then and there, and the young man replies that it's better to try the following year than to lose their lives today. With a sad and resigned smile, he concludes that a powerful prodigy like Aster would never understand the terrible reality the weak face. With the mass surrender of his team, Aster finds himself forced to rush alone toward the enemy base to try to save the exam. He understands his companion's attitude, remembering that to the citizens of the kingdom, the Elmheim clan is a dynasty of untouchable tyrants ruled by terror. Aster rethinks Vigor's painful words about the feelings of helplessness of those who do not possess great strength. The Proto lets out an ironic chuckle upon noting that, in a way, the people around him also view him merely as part of that terrible family of tyrants. He enters enemy territory and finds the absolute silence of the place strange, questioning why no one has initiated combat yet. He wonders if the opponents are just acting with extreme caution or if there is something wrong happening behind the scenes. Suddenly, the leader of the yellow team emerges from the shadows and smiles, intrigued to note that Aster actually had the audacity to invade alone. He reveals enigmatically that absolutely everything is running exactly according to the predictions laid out by his master. Aster narrows his eyes suspiciously and wonders whom the youth is referring to with that mysterious comment. The young man begins to lower the yellow flag from his own mast, commenting in a mocking tone that he was starting to get quite bored. He tosses the flag aside and challenges Aster to demonstrate what he is truly capable of. The Prota follows the fabric's path, falling with a deeply analytical and serious expression. He freezes as he sees the youth begin to hoist the red flag in place of the yellow one, questioning the logic behind that betrayal. The situation becomes clear when Aster notices that the entire enemy team had already surrendered without a fight to the red faction. Grian resurfaces with a triumphant smile, boasting that this is the true and relentless way of waging war used by his main family. Colossal magical explosions begin to echo throughout the forest, marking the true start of the siege confrontations. The 20 participants, divided into 3 teams, engage in brutal battles to try to dominate the highest number of territories. Aster blocks a powerful attack and directly questions his opponent about the real intention behind his actions. He asks straightforwardly why a warrior who belonged to the yellow team is acting in such a bizarre manner. Aster demands to know why the youth is voluntarily hoisting the red flag of Grian's team at his own base. With a wicked smile, the blonde warrior raises his glowing sword and reveals that they forged a secret alliance of cooperation with the main family. Christopher Nolan, the eldest son of the renowned Nolan family founders of court swordsmanship and wielder of a five-winged crest, ended up overshadowed by the brilliance of the seven-winged wielder in the first exam. However, only 2 people managed to survive that merciless spear test without so much as changing their facial expression. Those 2 formidable warriors were precisely Aster, the seven-winged wielder, and Nolan himself. The examiner observes thoughtfully from afar, recognizing that both are brilliant knights, true raw gems ready to be polished. While he regrets the fact that both cannot pass together, Aster counters Nolan by questioning him about that so-called alliance with the main family. Aster advances against Nolan's attacks and asks if he truly understands that, even with this alliance, only one of the teams will come out victorious in the end. Nolan smiles confidently and admits that is exactly why he decided to let the main house win, revealing that his companions and the Elmheim clan must already be on their way to attack Aster's base. Aster becomes instantly worried, realizing that Smites and the other members of his team are in serious danger. He stares at his opponent and asks if Grian threatened him with that old talk about what happens to those who dare challenge the powerful Elmheim clan. Nolan responds coldly that nobody in their right mind would willingly place themselves in the path of a carriage knowing they would get run over. He takes a step forward while pondering that the nobility of knights is entirely built upon a rigid and relentless hierarchy. The youth asserts that bowing before this power is simply the natural behavior expected of any noble, delivering another powerful blow. At that moment, Aster notices with astonishment that the standard sword he received has begun to crack strangely in the middle of the clash. The proto wonders in outrage if the examiner who distributed the weapons intentionally handed him a defective piece before the test started. No one tries to reassure him by guaranteeing that this will be a strictly individual duel, for he personally never liked the members of the Elmheim clan. He charges fiercely, declaring that he especially hates arrogant show-offs like Aster himself. Nolan delivers a well-aimed strike that breaks Aster's sword in half, scattering metal shards through the air. Despite the devastating impact, Aster remains calm and catches the broken piece of his blade with his bare hands. With quick reflexes, he leaps backward and hurls the sharp metal shard directly at his opponent like a projectile. No one is startled by the proto's unexpected reaction and hastily uses his blade to deflect the shard coming his way. Upon realizing that Aster is rapidly distancing himself from there, Nolan shouts in outrage, asking if he truly intends to flee in the middle of the fight. Aster shouts back, warning that he will deal with him later, for he has just found someone else with whom he needs to settle scores immediately. Nolan lets out a mocking sigh and boasts about putting fear into his opponent, calling Aster a true embarrassment to all knights. But his smile quickly vanishes as he looks at the ground and notices the rest of the broken blade gleaming in the dirt. He picks up one of the shards with his hand and realizes, shocked, that Aster's weapon was so fragile that it was nothing but a cheap, low-quality imitation. Nolan sighs irritated upon understanding that it was sabotaged by the Elmheim clan itself, regretting that such a promising fight was ruined by foul play. Meanwhile, Aster rushes toward his own base and shouts worriedly to know if Smites is alright. Grian observes him from the top of the rampart and comments with disdain that his cousin arrived earlier than planned, deducing that Nolan couldn't even slow him down. The youth laughs out loud sarcastically, recalling that Aster had said he would be enough on his own, which ended up creating false expectations. He boasts that his team just captured the third base a few moments ago, ensuring complete domination over the entire exam territory. With his gaze burning with seriousness, Aster interrupts his rival's rambling by calling Grian directly by his name. He glares at the rampart packed with opponents and sharply demands to know what Grian did to the members of his team. Grian merely glares back in silence for a brief moment with a cold and calculating expression. Suddenly, one of Aster's allies sneaks up from behind and presses the sharp tip of his sword against the prota's back. The traitor asks awkwardly for him not to hold a grudge, reminding him that he had warned from the start that he didn't intend to risk his own skin by his side. The young man scratches his head tensely and explains that he would never ally himself with a reckless fool who decided to challenge the Elmheim clan head-on. Grian bursts into laughter up from above upon seeing the scene, mocking the fact that Aster's companions surrendered without offering the slightest sign of resistance. He jeers, saying that even those country bumpkins knew very well which side of the Elmheim family they should stand on to survive. Grian gestures with 2 fingers and presumably corrects his cousin, declaring that victory in the battle is already guaranteed. He patiently explains that the sole victory condition for that siege combat is managing to maintain control of at least 2 territories when the time expires. Grian points out that even if Aster runs desperately from one base to another, hoisting his blue flag from now on, the effort will be useless. He points to the blue flag thrown and torn on the ground, reminding him that the Prota has no allies to defend it from a new attack. Through a simple tactic, Rian's group only needs to wait for Aster to move away from a base to go there and hoist the red flag again. The young man flashes a wicked smile and reaffirms that it will be enough to maintain control of 2 bases at the end of the day to ensure his team's approval in the exam. Undeterred, Aster enters his combat stance and warns that he only needs to ensure that his rivals don't even get the chance to try that plan. With a sharp and relentless gaze, he coldly declares that he intends to solve the problem by slicing through every single adversary who dares stand in his way. Aster's overwhelming aura causes the traders and guards around him to begin trembling in dread, sweating from fear in the face of such immense hostility. Grian tries to mask his own nervousness encounters with a forced smile, claiming his cousin is merely bluffing to try to scare them. The heir points at the broken weapon and mocks, saying that a disarmed 7-winged wielder is nothing more than a weak warrior without wings. He challenges the Prota mockingly, questioning if he truly has the courage to try to face all the warriors present there at once. Aster analyzes the hilt of his broken sword with a slight smile and comments that he really does have a problem there. However, he soon adds that he is quite impressed by the ingenious tactics planned by his cousin Grian. Smites freezes in dread as he sees the blade of his own weapon suddenly shatter right before his eyes. Aster remains with his back turned, commenting that Grian's plan was drawn up much more intelligently than he had initially imagined. From up above, Grian displays a victorious smile and mentally celebrates that he has finally secured absolute triumph over his cousin. The broken pieces of the blade fall lifelessly onto the dusty battlefield ground. Aster narrows his golden eyes with deadly coldness, preparing his next move without showing any sign of weakness. He turns around calmly and repeats that he is impressed, congratulating his cousin for having planned every detail of that ambush so meticulously. Grian continues savoring what he believes to be his definitive victory, his eyes gleaming with pure malice. Meanwhile, the remainder of the trader's broken weapon falls noisily to the soil. At an absurd speed, Aster dodges past Smites with a swift and imperceptible movement. The trader can barely react before being struck by a devastating blow from Aster that knocks the wind right out of him. Aster moves nimbly close to the ground, while Smites is thrown brutally backward from the impact of the attack. In the middle of the movement, the Prota extends his arm with pinpoint precision and snatches the hilt of his opponent's sword out of the air. Wielding the new weapon, he delivers a single spinning slash charged with red mana that instantly sweeps away all surrounding enemies. Up above, Grian freezes completely and stammers without understanding, as he sees all his subordinates fallen and defeated in a matter of seconds. Aster points his new glowing blade toward the rampart and warns that exposing himself directly before him was the worst mistake Grian could have made. He calmly explains that his rival dug his own defeat by overextending himself and underestimating his opponent's true power. Overcome by a fury mixed with dread, Grian rages with hatred and calls his cousin a cursed monster. Without wasting time on provocations, Aster propels his body upward in a spectacular leap, enveloped by beams of red mana. He cuts through the air like a meteor, rising rapidly toward the top of the massive stone rampart. Grian watches the scene in complete shock, screaming that it is humanly impossible for anyone to manage to leap to such an absurd height. Already hovering above him, Aster glares at his rival mercilessly and warns that he was too slow in trying to draw his own weapon. The Prota delivers a lightning-fast attack that hits Grian full force, causing him to let out a groan of pain as his defense is ripped to shreds. Aster recalls with nostalgia the exact day he experienced the sensation of flying for the very first time in his life. He reflects that, because he started his journey wingless, he can perfectly value and feel this wonderful sensation of omnipotence when controlling his mana. The Proto comments ironically that having wings is truly wonderful, pointing out that that massive rampart once seemed unreachable. Desperate and completely dominated by the overwhelming pressure, Grion tremblingly begs for his cousin to stop that immediately. But Aster ignores the pleas and continues his merciless descent, channeling a brutal amount of red energy into his final attack. With a sarcastic smile on his face, he coldly concludes that that great barrier separating them now seems extremely insignificant. A colossal and devastating reddish explosion consumes the entire fortress courtyard, generating a massive shockwave that shakes the location. A dense and thick cloud of dust and smoke rises into the skies, completely blanketing the view of the area struck by the impact. Coughing amidst the dust, Smites and the other survivors observe the destruction terrified, wondering what might have happened to the pair in the midst of that chaos. Suddenly, the traitor freezes completely and wide-eyes as he focuses his vision on the center of the smoke that is beginning to dissipate. Aster emerges imposingly, walking calmly through the smoke, dragging Grion's unconscious body by the collar of his clothes. With a completely serene countenance and without showing the slightest sign of fatigue, the Proto walks triumphantly. He holds the defeated heir of the main family with extreme ease, as if he were nothing but a light burden. Upon being dropped without any ceremony, Grion falls heavily to the ground, letting out only faint groans of pain as he tries to regain his senses. Noting that his allies are paralyzed watching the scene, Grion shouts furiously, asking why they are standing there like statues instead of taking action. The heir desperately orders them to move immediately and finish off Aster once and for all to save his honor. He rages that this is a direct and absolute order from the powerful Elmheim family, which none of them would have the audacity to disobey. Smites grinds his teeth amidst the panic and begins to step forward slowly with his weapon, feeling cornered by the clan's order. Aster glares his teammate directly in the eyes and asks if they truly feel that much fear of a possible retaliation from his family. Smuts shouts desperately, confirming that they do, explaining that his family is just a third-rate noble clan that could easily be wiped off the map. The young man pours his heart out in tears that they would be crushed like ants if they angered the tyrants, leaving them with no choice but to act submissively to survive in that cruel world. He concludes screaming that to someone privileged like Aster, who was born with everything, the daily and humiliating struggles of the weak must seem completely incomprehensible. Aster listens to the young man's entire emotional outburst in absolute silence, maintaining a deeply calm and analytical countenance. Suddenly, a light and subtle smile appears on the Prota's lips, breaking the tension of the moment. Confused and irritated by the reaction, Smite stammers nervously and demands to know why Aster is laughing at his despair. Aster reveals that his sister Kudravka told him the exact same words in the past, complaining that he would never understand the feelings of those who possess nothing in life. Aster admits he has his own arguments against this, but he cannot deny the fact that he truly is someone very blessed at the moment. He points the sword right next to Grion's neck, startling his rival, and claims that it is precisely because he is blessed that there are things only he is capable of doing. Standing over his defeated cousin, the Proto declares loud and clear that his true enemy is the Elmheim clan, and that, if no one else can do anything, he will change this arrogant and oppressive dynasty himself. With his eyes overflowing with determination, Aster firmly proclaims that he will crush the entire current Elmheim system. The nobles and warriors watching the scene are completely jaw-dropped and incredulous at such audacity. Fallen on the ground, Grion stares at his cousin with a mix of terror and confusion, unable to believe what he just heard. Smite stammers nervously and asks if Aster is truly aware of the weight of his words, realizing that this is something extremely dangerous. Aster just stares back at him seriously and calmly confirms that this is, in fact, an official declaration of war against the clan. He warns that no matter how much they flatter the current Elmheim leadership, the end of this blind submission will only be betrayal and a miserable fate. The young man adds that if they do not want to end up in such a tragic way, the only real way out is to stand up and fight. He raises his weapon and reflects that the seven-winged crest he carries on his back was surely granted to him for the sole purpose of achieving this revolution. Aster then turns to the other warriors present there and challenges them to make a decisive choice about which side of Elmheim they will decide to follow from now on. Green rents furiously from the ground, screaming in desperation that such treason would never be allowed and threatening that he remembers the face and name of every single one of them there. The fallen heir continues to yell severe threats at the soldiers, challenging anyone to dare betray him at that moment. He bellows, saying that everyone knows very well the terrible fate that awaits the families of those who dare to rebel. Smites grinds his teeth amidst deep anguish, feeling the full weight of that impossible choice on his shoulders. He lets out a cry of frustration and fury, finally releasing all the accumulated tension in his chest. Smites curses in hatred and throws what is left of his weapon to the ground, giving up on continuing with that farce. He walks resolutely up to Aster and asks directly if the Proto will truly keep the promise to take down the tyrannical clan for them. The young man warns with eyes glistening with determination that he will hold a deep, eternal grudge if Aster builds up their hopes, only to fail in the end. With complete serenity and firmness in his golden eyes, Aster gives his word of honor and guarantees that he will keep the promise. Smites nods and begins to prepare, firmly holding his team's ribbon in his hands. He proudly introduces himself as the eldest son of his noble house, ready to take the reins of his own destiny. Raising the blue ribbon high in front of everyone in the courtyard, Smites officially declares that from that moment on, he is on Aster's side. The other candidates watch everything perplexed, whispering in fear as they realize that Grian's perfect plan has completely crumbled. Grian stares at his cousin with eyes bloodshot with pure hatred, calling Smites an ignorant fool for his audacity. Smites turns to his teammates and yells, asking why they are still standing there instead of joining the cause. He calls for everyone to seize this golden opportunity to show the value of low-ranking nobles and put all their chips on the bearer of the seven wings. His fiery words begin to have an instant effect, causing the other soldiers to hesitate and begin to change their minds. Aster observes the scene satisfied with having secured his first real ally, saving him from the exhausting work of having to defend the bases entirely alone. However, the Proto ponders mentally that this is still far from enough and that he will need to recruit many more allies if he wants to overthrow the dynasty. Grian remains on his knees on the dirt floor, his body trembling with anger and absolute humiliation before everyone. One of his subordinates approaches quickly with a worried look and extends his hand asking if he is okay. Grian delivers a violent slap to push the young man away, yelling in a rage for that useless trash not to dare lay hands on him. He bites his lips in anger as he dwells on Aster's words about overthrowing the clan, calling his cousin the filthy scum of the Branch family. The heir knows that if he allows Aster to continue acting freely like that, he will lose all his dignity and will no longer be able to face the leaders of the main family. Grian clenches his fists in outrage, swearing to himself that he will never fail in such a humiliating way as his brother Darius ended up failing before him. He tightly squeezes his own injured and bloody hand, determined not to let his journey end in that shameful manner. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echo through the courtyard, and a calm voice asks what is happening to the proud heir of Elmheim. The voice mocks Grian's miserable state, commenting that he looks quite pathetic for someone they had not seen in a while. Grian raises his head in surprise and exclaims Nolan's name upon seeing the skilled knight standing right there before his eyes. He points furiously in Aster's direction and begins to yell, asking what Nolan has been doing all this time, since defeating his cousin was his only task. However, Grian soon forms a malicious and hopeful smile, remembering that he still has that formidable warrior as his strong combat ally. He ponders that although Nolan's crest does not compare to the seven-winged one, his sword skills are undisputedly superior to those of any other candidate there. Grian screams hysterically, ordering Nolan to advance immediately and slice Aster into 1,000 little pieces once and for all. But to everyone's surprise, Nolan just coldly tosses the red team ribbon back into Grian's lap. He turns his back in disdain and simply declares that he only came to return that useless piece of cloth. The young knight explains seriously that, as he suspected, the underhanded and cheating methods of the main family go completely against his code of chivalry. Nolan raises his hand casually and concludes that he is officially breaking the secret alliance they had formed, leaving Grian completely speechless. The last soldiers allied with Grian fall into total despair upon seeing that even the renowned Nolan family has abandoned them, no longer knowing which side they should be on in that battle. Nolan draws his sword and turns to Aster, stating that they are finally back to square one and challenging his rival to settle their unfinished business right there. Aster just observes him back in silence with an extremely calm and focused expression. Nolan raises his sword with dignity, taking pride in the traditional swordsmanship of his esteemed family. He formally declares that this duel will decide which power is truly superior, pitting his renowned swordsmanship against Aster's seven-winged crest. A golden and imposing energy begins to emanate from Nolan's sword as he prepares for the inevitable combat. He advances fiercely with his shining blade, shouting so that it finally becomes clear once and for all which technique is superior. However, Aster blocks the advance with ease, using his red mana, and calmly warns that their duel will have to wait a bit. With extraordinary strength, the Proto delivers a crushing blow that forces Nolan to retreat due to the tremendous impact of energy. Nolan freezes in awe and narrows his eyes upon realizing that his opponent's physical strength and speed are on an absurd level. He steps back startled and concludes in horror that Aster's fighting style is completely different and much more dangerous than at the beginning of the test. He asks confusedly if Aster has forgotten the fundamental rules of that difficult trial. Nolan tries to warn him, reminding him that only one team can pass, and that they absolutely must face each other to become Knights of the Realm. He energetically insists that the only logical alternative is to settle that dispute right here and at this exact moment. Aster sighs lightly with his eyes closed and replies that a mutual elimination would be a major obstacle to his future plans. He looks intently at his rival and reveals, surprisingly, that he wishes to see Nolan also crowned as a legitimate Knight of the Realm. Nolan stammers in complete shock and confusion at such an unexpected declaration. Aster walks calmly and ponders that after encouraging everyone to overthrow Elmheim's tyranny, it would be unfair to ask Nolan to give up on his dream just because they are on rival teams. With a cunning smile, the Proto reveals that he has devised an audacious plan to ensure that absolutely everyone present there passes together. Both Nolan and the proud Green widen their eyes in total disbelief at that absurd proposal. Smites and the other survivors exclaim incredulously, stating that it is impossible to bypass the rigid rules of the Academy in such an outrageous way. Aster admits he cannot give absolute guarantees, but ensures he is confident and warns that he will need the full cooperation of each one of them to make it work. He begins to walk toward Grian on his knees, warning that first he will need to settle an important detail with his cousin. Grian trembles with fear as he sees his cousin's imposing figure slowly approach him in a threatening manner. But to everyone's amazement, Aster extends his hand amiably with a light smile and ironically suggests that the two of them make peace right there. A short time later, the examiners spot a bizarre scene on the central flagpole with the three flags of the rival teams tied and hoisted together on the same mast. The experienced examiner completely loses his composure and bellows furiously at the candidates, questioning if they even learned how to hoist a flag correctly. Aster calmly explains that the only real rule was to occupy 2 or more bases, pointing out that at no point did the regulations forbid different teams from hoisting their flags together on the same base. He concludes by stating that because of this technical loophole, the 3 teams decided to form a peaceful alliance of cooperation to jointly occupy all available bases. The examiner grinds his teeth in anger and rants right in Aster's face, asking if he really believes he will pass everyone and accusing him of making a mockery of the selection exam. Smites trembles in fear, muttering that he knew that twisted logic would never work, while Grian just turns his bitter gaze away. The instructor fumes furiously that if a knight received orders to destroy an enemy territory, he could never simply shake hands with the opponent and return home. Aster counters the shout with total tranquility, arguing that a knight would act exactly like that if the enemy in question was worth much more alive than dead to the kingdom. The examiner counters layout, enraged that a knight's duty is only to be the obedient sword of the state, emphasizing that simple soldiers do not have the right to make such judgments. The Proto challenges him by asking if he intends to disqualify them, pointing out that since no official rule was broken, such a severe punishment would just be the examiner's ego overstepping its bounds. The instructor grinds his teeth and swallows hard as he realizes he has been cornered by the young man's flawless and airtight arguments. Aster steps even closer to the man and whispers with an extremely serious and intimidating expression. He ironically questions whether the proud main family of Elmheim would really stay silent seeing their heir Grion fail in such a vexing way if everyone were disqualified. The instructor lets out a sigh of extreme irritation as he realizes that the Proto has put him in a political dead end with no quick way out. Faced with the impasse, the examiner is forced to withdraw to consult his direct superiors, leaving all participants apprehensive in a waiting room for an entire hour. The atmosphere in the room becomes extremely dense and tense, with the candidates trembling with anxiety over the final verdict. Smites murmurs with anguish about the real possibility of everyone having failed because of that audacity, receiving only an evasive answer from Aster. The Proto reassures his companion by pointing out that, at the very least, they forced the Night Council to discuss the matter seriously for the first time. Sitting a short distance away, Grian just lets out a grunt of displeasure and turns his gaze away with resentment. Smites confesses in a low voice that he is deeply shocked by the fact that Grian accepted to cooperate with the plan willingly, asking what Aster said to convince him. Aster displays a mysterious and mischievous smile, replying in a relaxed manner that it was no big deal. Suddenly, the large double doors of the hall are thrown open violently, and the examiner enters, demanding the immediate attention of everyone present. Smite stands up startled at that exact moment, while Aster just calmly turns to face the official. The instructor announces loud and clear that Director Mimir himself has come personally to reveal the final result of that turbulent selection trial. Absolute silence dominates the stone hall as the highest authority of the academy walks resolutely to the front of the anxious students. Mimir stares at the crowd of young people with a deep gaze and orders everyone to pay close attention to the definitive announcement that will define their futures. Smites observes the director from afar and asks in a whisper if that imposing-looking man is really the director of the academy. Aster comments in a relaxed manner that he just looks like an ordinary elderly gentleman, causing Smites to immediately ask him to show more respect. Director Mimir approaches the table, looks directly at the Proto, and comments that because of him, the council was forced to make an extremely difficult decision. The elderly man explains to the whole room that accepting so many passing candidates all at once is something totally unprecedented in the institution's history. He reveals that there were proposals for annulment and holding a new test, but thanks to the crucial support of other influential directors, they decided to accept Aster's appeal. Smite swallows hard, extremely nervous, while Aster just stares at the director in silence and wonders what that decision really means in practice. A gentle and warm smile appears spontaneously on Director Mimir's wrinkled face. He closes his eyes with satisfaction and officially announces that absolutely all candidates involved in the alliance have duly passed. Smites and the other warriors explode in shouts of pure joy and celebration, while Grion watches everything completely paralyzed by shock. Mimir wishes for everyone to continue doing their absolute best from now on to prove that the council's decision to accept them was not a mistake. Smites flashes a massive smile and stares at Aster with extreme gratitude, while the Proto just observes everything with a serene and satisfied look. The director claps his hands, congratulating everyone on their enrollment, and gives them an official welcome to the renowned Knight Academy of the Kingdom of Drussel. Later that same night, a loud sigh of pure relief and relaxation echoes from inside the thermal baths of the luxurious academy. Relaxing in a colossal hot bath, Smites joyfully celebrates the fact that the food there is delicious and the baths are simply gigantic. He splashes water into the air, laughing lightheartedly, and exclaims with enthusiasm that all this luxury is only possible thanks to Aster's heroic efforts. Aster remains relaxing quietly in the thermal water, running his hand through his wet hair with a thoughtful expression. The other young men fully agree and shout in celebration, swearing eternal loyalty and promising to follow the Proto as their new leader for the rest of their lives. Sitting in a corner on the edge of the bath, Nolan grumbles irritably, calling the guys a bunch of opportunists, and warns Aster that he personally does not intend to thank him for that. Smites laughs and teases the proud knight, reminding him that those are way too arrogant words for someone who just lost to Aster, but a blushing Nolan fires back, saying he did not lose, he just accepted a strategic tie. The Proto just lets out a light chuckle at the argument and ponders satisfied that they challenged the feared main family, and, even so, managed to become official students. He silently reflects that eventually each of those small victories will accumulate into a colossal wave capable of crushing Elmheim's tyranny once and for all. With his golden eyes shining with conviction, the young man mentally declares that it is exactly in this place that their great rebellion officially begins. Aster fondly remembers his older sisters who have already graduated and gets excited remembering that Alphen, enrolled a year before him, will certainly be ready to help him at the academy. He stands up from the thermal bath and focuses his thoughts on the harsh military training that will begin first thing the next day. The young man walks toward the exit, aware that first he will need to get used to the routine and lifestyle of that new environment. However, upon taking a few steps toward the locker room, Aster suddenly stops and lets out a murmur of pure confusion. He notices that Smites and absolutely all the other warriors in the pool are staring at his back with completely frozen and fixed gazes. The Prota lets out a startled cry as he sees the crowd of guys suddenly jump out of the water and rush desperately in his direction. Smites and the others explain, shouting that having a living bearer of 7 wings is like having a sacred good luck charm, and suggest praying to him for a divine blessing for the school year. The guys kneel on the wet floor and begin to make comical prayers toward Aster's back, who rants indignantly, saying that this is complete nonsense. Nogan just watches that comical uproar from afar with his hand on his head, feeling deeply exhausted by the madness of his new classmates. Looking at the starry sky outside the large glass window, he sighs exhaustedly and ponders that he is already predicting a future full of headaches at the academy. Meanwhile, in a luxurious and dark mansion under the moonlight, Grion remains kneeling with his head bowed as he listens to his mother Helen's harshest and coldest words of disappointment regarding his failure on the test. Helen turns with eyes gleaming with pure hatred and fumes irritably, pointing out that her son allowed that branch family bastard to openly declare he will crush the powerful Elmheim clan. She questions with extreme sharpness if her son really just stood there watching that outrageous humiliation without offering any kind of resistance or punishment. Grion begs desperately for forgiveness, with his face bathed in sweat, solemnly swearing that he will correct his terrible mistake and meet all of his mother's expectations in the next confrontation. However, before he can conclude his promise, the young heir is abruptly silenced by a violent and merciless physical strike that makes him spit blood. His sister Lysiane looks down at him with utter contempt and coldly warns that there will be no next opportunity for a piece of failed trash like him. She walks over imposing and comments with cruelty that useless and failed scum like her own younger brother are good for nothing. Liliane states without hesitation that he would be more useful if he were turned into feed for the magical beasts in the dungeon, pejoratively comparing him to their older brother Darius. Fallen and bleeding on the floor, Grion trembles with terror and desperately begs for his cruel older sister to have mercy and spare his life. But Liliane completely ignores the desperate pleas and delivers another violent kick to her younger brother's body without any compassion. Grion grinds his teeth amidst unbearable pain and brutal humiliation, feeling a deep hatred grow in his chest. He silently curses the Prota, swearing in his mind that all that physical pain and humiliation are entirely the fault of Aster's existence. Grion furiously recalls the moment in the forest when Aster offered him help in a friendly manner, warning that it would be terrible for him to return empty-handed to the main family. On that occasion, Aster explained that if the supreme leader of Elmheim found out that Grion was defeated and manipulated by a branch family member, the consequences would be dire. The Prota whispered in a chilling way that the leader of the main family would surely not hesitate to end him if he knew of such a failure. Grion freezes, completely recalling his cousin's cold words, realizing with dread that Aster knew perfectly well how ruthless the Elmheim clan is. Aster added that he personally witnessed Darius's terrible final moments in the dungeon and that the scene was absolutely horrifying to behold. He concluded his warning by stating seriously that that was definitely no way for a human being to pass away, leaving Grion deeply shaken by the warning. Aster faces Grion with an intimidating look and asks if he really wants to end up tragically like his brother, advising him to just stay quiet and ignore what is about to happen. Grion is completely terrified in the face of that silent threat, while Aster promises that he will help him if he decides to cooperate. However, in the main family mansion, Helen decides to intervene and coldly orders Liliane to stop the physical aggression and spare her youngest brother's life. Helen mocks Grion's weakness, pointing out that he is crying and begging for forgiveness, while the young man fallen on the floor can barely whisper from so much pain. In another corner of the hall, Julius A. Elmheim lets out an arrogant laugh and claims with disdain that they are all a family united by the same blood. He aggressively rests his hand on Alphen's head, who is pinned to the floor, and cynically comments that family members should get along. Alphen remains in complete silence under the humiliating pressure of that touch, containing her anger while being subjugated by her sadistic relative. Helen walks imposingly through the hall and ponders that the absolute sovereignty of her family was what kept the knights under control until the current moment. She turns with a worried look and admits that this reputation of untouchable power has begun to waver dangerously since the emergence of a bearer of the 7 wings. The matriarch explains that this is precisely why the 2 siblings need to act quickly to remind everyone who really runs the region. Liliane cracks an insane and sadistic smile as she declares that they will prove the main family's strength is not just for show. Julius displays an extremely cruel expression and adds that they will show the insolent ones what true violence is. Meanwhile, on the training grounds of the renowned Drasil Academy, the leveling test for the new recruits begins with extreme intensity. The military instructors welcome the young people and announce in a loud voice that everyone there was selected as cadets for the glorious Royal Knight Guard. The officials proudly explain that the Royal Knights represent the ultimate elite force of the kingdom, surpassing any other ordinary warrior in strategy and combat. Because of this, the instructors make it clear that anyone aiming to enter the group needs to demonstrate that they are truly special. One of the cadets tries to deliver a powerful strike with his sword, but the blade ends up shattering upon colliding against the impenetrable, magical iron pillars. The young recruit steps back startled and curses in frustration upon realizing that his physical attack did not even scratch the massive training structure. The narration explains that the academy divides the new students into 6 different classification tiers according to their individual skills. Smites exerts himself to the utmost striking the pillar, while the instructor reinforces that those who can only wield an ordinary sword are considered third-rate warriors. The warrior grinds his teeth in pure frustration and fatigue upon realizing the chasm of power that exists between the candidates. The instructor's voice echoes through the field, stating that cadets capable of combining the use of magic in combat are classified as second class. No one demonstrates his immense ease by delivering agile strikes enveloped in magical flames directly against the target. The explanation proceeds, revealing that only the rare prodigies who perfectly master both the sword and magic reach the prestigious first tier. The instructor roars with determination to the students, warning that the only freedom allowed in that place is the one conquered through brute force and constant evolution. Suddenly, the surrounding cadets widen their eyes in complete shock at an earth-shattering boom that echoes through the courtyard. Aster stands serenely after performing a perfect slash that completely destroyed the impenetrable magical iron pillar. The colossal stone and metal structure slides split in half with millimetric precision, leaving everyone present in absolute silence. The instructor cheerfully suggests that the other cadets try to aim for that level of skill, but Smites and his companions scream desperately that this is a humanly impossible task. Aster calmly sheathes his sword, unbothered by the commotion around him or the watchful eyes observing him from high up in the tower. From the top of the castle, 2 veteran examiners admire the feat and comment impressed on the surreal talent of the legendary bearer of the 7 wings. They highlight that slicing through a pillar with the same density as an iron golem so easily proves the boy is truly someone extraordinary. However, the older official seriously warns that if Aster gets complacent with his current level of power, he will end up being surpassed. The veteran warns that the young man will inevitably be devoured by the ruthless monsters that already rule the top of that military academy. The memory of the countless cadets defeated and humiliated by Elmheim's elite serves as a grim reminder of the danger lurking for the new students. Sometime later, Aster observes the movement through the corridor window and murmurs thoughtfully about the institution's rigid ranking system. Smites appears by his side holding his identification card and laments that they barely passed the admission exam and are already being tested again under ruthless meritocracy. The companion notes intrigued that of all the freshmen that year, only Aster and Nolan achieved the feat of not starting in the lowest tier. Smites stares at the 2 badges and sighs dejectedly, noticing that he has already fallen behind on the very first day, admitting that he already expected this inevitable result. Aster displays a friendly smile and encourages his friend, reminding him that no one can become a royal knight without reaching the second tier anyway. Smites makes a dramatic face and complains playfully that his new boss is way too demanding and strict with expectations. The prota gets a completely confused expression and questions where that sudden nickname boss came from. Smites approaches with a serious face and asks if Aster really forgot the striking words he said earlier. He recalls the triumphant moment when the prota raised his sword and declared with absolute conviction that he would crush the tyranny of Elmheim's main family. The warrior explains that many of the defeated candidates took that bold promise entirely seriously, seeing him as the only hope to change their miserable lives. He rests his arm on Aster's shoulders and states with determination that they are all ready to carry and support the young leader on this dangerous journey. Smites raises his fist with enthusiasm and shouts joyfully that they are all going to crush Elmheim's arrogance together. Aster displays a subtle smile and mentally agrees with his companion, realizing he will need to get even stronger to be able to protect everyone. With a focused and determined look, the prota tightly grips his identification card and vows to himself that he will reach the top to destroy his enemies for good. The solemn mood is broken suddenly when Smites' stomach rumbles loudly, making him laugh sheepishly and suggests that they start the Great Revolution by securing a good meal first. Smites complains that they won't survive the afternoon training if they stay this hungry, but suddenly stops upon seeing a crowd gathered at the entrance of the cafeteria. The other students spot Aster approaching and rush desperately to him to warn in a panic that the tyrants of the Elmheim family have invaded the place. Inside the cafeteria, Julius Elmheim chews a piece of food with disdain upon noticing his cousin's arrival and asks ironically if he is the famous Aster. The villain comments that Aster took so long to show up that they decided to start eating without him, putting the prota immediately on high alert. Sitting imposingly over a pile of defeated students' bodies, Julius displays a sadistic smile alongside his cruel sister Liliane. Smites freezes in fear and asks if that arrogant guy is really the main heir, receiving a silent, intense confirmation from Aster. Julius, the second son of the main house and next in line for succession, amuses himself with the freshman's deplorable situation alongside his sister Liliane. The terrible siblings are known throughout the Elmheim territory as the most cruel and ruthless tyrants of the entire family lineage. Aster swallows hard and mentally admits that he had completely forgotten that this sadistic duo would also be present at the academy. Liliane caresses the hair of one of the fallen victims and mocks, saying the boy has a very pretty face, unlike the failed and ugly brother she despises so much. Under the sole of Liliane's boot, the masked person lets out a muffled groan of pure pain and suffering as they are pressed against the cold floor. Smites watches the scene horrified and questions indignantly why they are covering that poor person's face with such a bizarre iron mask. Aster gnashes his teeth and explains with a voice trembling with anger that the terrible object is known as the Iron Shackles. He reveals that the Elmheim clan uses this torture device as an extreme punitive method to discipline and correct those they consider failures. Julius steps hard on the masked victim's chest and mocks Aster, commenting that his cousin knows too much for someone raised in the peaceful branch of the family. The tyrant continues the mockery, pointing out that despite carrying the prestigious Elmheim surname, the fallen person was demoted on the very first day to the humiliating 6th tier. He concludes by saying that it is an absolutely pathetic story, while rubbing his foot against the helpless victim's iron mask. Julius cracks a wicked smile and states that, as a very kind older brother, he decided to give that special gift to motivate them to work much harder from now on. He details the sadistic inner workings of the torture, explaining that when food, water, and even fresh air become hard rewards to obtain, anyone will do the impossible to survive, since the inability to remove the device results in a painful demise by suffocation. Smites freezes in fear, looking around and realizing that all the seniors present there are wearing the exact same terrible iron mask. Julius laughs at their reaction and comments that the seniors now look like starving beasts, ordering the freshmen to greet them properly. He grabs Alphen by her hair and pulls her without any gentleness, demanding that she lose her shyness and show her face to her younger brother already. The villain mocks, saying it has been a good while since the two siblings last saw each other in person. Alfin walks slowly with heavy steps until stopping right before Aster, leaving Smites and the others in complete shock at the revelation. Aster widens his golden eyes in pure horror and disbelief upon recognizing his own older sister's silhouette in that deplorable situation. Julius displays a triumphant smirk and asks the Proto if his sister does not look like a completely different person now. Alfin remains static and unresponsive, her gaze completely lifeless behind the thick metal mask sealing her face. The Proto completely loses control of his emotions and screams desperately for the name of his beloved sister, Alfin. Alfin stares at her younger brother with eyes glistening with sweat and anguish, unable to say a single word due to the terrible device. Fury consumes Aster's mind, causing him to clench his teeth so hard that hatred overflows from his countenance. He quickly brings his hand to the hilt of his sword, ready to retaliate against that cowardly humiliation with immediate violence. Out of his mind with so much anger, the young man roars, demanding to know what that lowlife Julius did to his beloved sister. Julius responds by tossing another empty iron mask, which collides and clangs loudly upon hitting the stone floor of the cafeteria. With utter mockery, the villain asks Aster to relax while displaying a smug and self-assured smile. The metal mask slides across the floor until stopping right next to Gryan's unconscious body. Julius raises his arms theatrically and warns mockingly that he made sure to bring enough devices to gift every single one of the new cadets. He laughs out loud, declaring that they will all have an unforgettable and extremely fun welcome party. The tyrant then orders the masked seniors to show their worth and use all their strength to capture the freshmen right then and there. He shouts in a threatening way that if the seniors want to be entitled to a decent meal tonight, they must force the masks onto each of the new students and drag them directly to him. Smites draws his weapon hastily to block a surprise attack, noticing in a panic that the eyes of those seniors look completely vacant and lifeless. Nolan also defends himself with difficulty and points out startled that the opponent's strength is absurd, estimating everyone to be at least fourth-tier warriors. Smites exerts himself to endure the pressure of combat and laments that although he intended to challenge Elmheim in the future, he never expected a sudden attack of that magnitude. Not knowing how to contain the enemy advance, the warrior calls desperately for orders from the Proto to know what to do. He fears they will all end up subjugated and masked if they do not react quickly, while Aster remains motionless, releasing an earth-shattering red aura. With a single precise and devastating movement, the Proto slams one of the attackers violently against the floor. Aster glares at the battlefield with a cold, golden gaze filled with an intense intent that makes the environment tremble with fear. Smites watches the scene impressed by the colossal pressure emanated by their leader and comments shocked on the absurd power of that red aura. Staring his cousin directly in the eyes, Aster challenges him with a chilling voice and asks what exactly Julius is trying to achieve with that clown show. Julius mockingly asks his cousin not to get so tense, cynically claiming that this warm reception is just a show of good faith on his part. He insults the new cadets who supported Aster, calling them talentless failures who only passed the test by riding on someone else's strength. The villain claims that when low-tier people are mediocre, even the leaders at the top end up devalued, emphasizing that he will never tolerate that kind of slack while he is in charge. Pressing Alfin's head even further against the floor, Julius declares that, for this reason, he decided to personally take on the responsibility of disciplining the new recruits. He raises the metallic device with a macabre smile and warns that he will do everything the ruthless Elmheim way, but Aster coldly interrupts him, saying he does not care about his excuses. With slow and decisive steps, the Proto walks toward Julius's throne, making the tyrant raise an eyebrow out of pure curiosity. Aster points his sword imbued with red energy and orders, in a chilling tone for his cousin to immediately remove that vulgar object from his sister's face. Without hesitating for another second, the young man advances against the villain with a sword strike filled with pure fury. However, to his complete shock, the impact of his attack is blocked violently by another blade that appears in the way. Aster steps back reeling and asks in absolute desperation what his sister thinks she is doing defending him. Alfin faces him with a cold look from behind her metal mask and asks in a muffled whisper for her younger brother not to hold a grudge against her. Julius lets out a victorious laugh, seeing the two siblings trading attacks, and cynically lies, claiming that Alfin decided to ally with him of her own free will. The tyrant suggests that the Prota ask her directly if he doubts his words, displaying a look of pure, malicious satisfaction. Alphen takes an aggressive combat stance and advances resolutely in Aster's direction, ready to fight her own brother. Watching everything from front row seats, Lillian smiles sadistically and comments in an amused manner that her brother Julius can be incredibly cruel when he wants to. Aster tries to process the deplorable situation, recalling that his adoptive mother was deeply distressed about not receiving news from Alphen for a very long time. The Prota is forced to block Alphen's fierce attacks, whose strikes are imbued with a powerful golden energy. He tries to reason amidst the sound of clashing blades, begging for her to stop obeying the orders of those tyrants once and for all. Aster solemnly promises that he will free her from that nightmare immediately, while agilely dodging his sister's lethal onslaughts. However, he hesitates upon realizing that her strikes carry actual lethal intent, while a furious voice shouts in the background asking why he is stalling so much. Nolan decides to step into the battle, and warns that if the Prota does not have the courage to attack, he will take care of defeating the main heir himself. The proud swordsman leaps toward Julius, delivering a flaming slash, and announces that he will finish the tyrant with his own hands. Julius does not even move from his chair and insults Nolan, commenting that he has less class than his youngest brother and that it disgusts him to see someone like that call themselves a knight. Nolan's attack is contained without any effort, making him furiously demand that his opponent draw his own sword for a fair fight. Nolan channels all his mana and vows that he will engrave his family's swordsmanship style directly into that arrogant noble's flesh. However, Julius blocks the devastating strike using only one hand and mockingly questions if the mere ordinary training effort would be enough to turn someone into a great warrior. Nolan lets out a groan of pain and shock upon realizing that his special technique was neutralized as if it were nothing. Julius roars that the boy is completely mistaken and releases an absurd amount of flaming energy that engulfs the entire space around them. The intense flames begin to melt and consume Nolan's sword through a supernatural and destructive heat. The young man screams in agony as the fire advances rapidly up his arm and begins to burn his bare skin. Laughing maniacally, Julius proclaims that in this world, only the strongest has the right to dictate the rules and be considered the best of all. He delivers an earth-shattering blow that flings Nolan's injured body violently backward. Smites rushes desperately toward his fallen companion to check if he is still breathing after receiving that devastating attack. Nolan remains stretched out on the damp floor, groaning in pain with severe burns spread across his face and arm. Smites fumes, seeing his friend's deplorable state, while Julius mocks, saying he loves crushing the pride and dignity of those who think they are superior. Lillian walks in a slow and sadistic manner toward them holding a metal mask, commenting that she will make an exception and keep the injured swordsman as her pet. She displays a devilish smile and mockingly adds that she has absolutely no interest in sparing the bearded warrior standing next to him. Julius compliments his sister's reasoning by stating that being weak is the worst sin in existence and that only the strong possess the privilege to speak their minds. He focuses his gaze on Aster and points out that the Prota has been thinking too highly of himself by gathering a bunch of useless allies around him. In the background, the other freshmen scream in despair for help as they are violently pinned down and forced to wear the terrible iron masks. The tyrant concludes his cruel speech, stating that the weakest will always be devoured by the strongest, while Nolan is subjugated by the attackers. Julius ignites blazing flames in both his hands and declares that no matter what path the Prota decides to take in the future, the final outcome will be the same. The villain displays a provocative countenance and asks if his cousin agrees with that harsh reality of absolute power. Aster explodes with hatred and advances at maximum speed against Julius, bellowing his cousin's name with the full force of his lungs. The tyrant just keeps a confident smirk while watching the lethal approach of the attack imbued with red energy. However, Aster's furious strike is repelled with extreme ease by a barrier of blazing flames that makes him back away choke. Before he can recover from the impact, the Prota is grabbed by the neck with an absurd and merciless physical strength. Aster gnashes his teeth and screams in agony as he is enveloped by an explosion of fire that begins to burn his body violently. Smates watches that nightmare scene from afar and bellows Aster's name in complete desperation and dread upon seeing their leader subjugated. Julius observes his cousin suffer amidst the flames and comments with deep boredom, questioning if that mediocre power is all the legendary bearer of the seven wings has to offer. Julius ridicules Aster by stating he thought the bearer of the seven wings would be much stronger and more useful than that. Enveloped in blazes, the proto calmly ponders that his cousin only managed to dodge his attack a single time. He stares at his opponent with a cold look and warns him not to get carried away by the temporary success of his defense. Suddenly, a colossal vortex of red energy and flames explodes in the center of the cafeteria as Aster rotates his attack. Julius widens his eyes in complete amazement upon realizing that the proto's attack has begun to spin with an overwhelming centrifugal force. He panics upon noticing that Aster used the thermal energy of his own flames to enhance the rotation of the strike. The tyrant grinds his teeth in pure frustration upon realizing he was completely outmatched in the strategic analysis of that combat. Aster delivers a monstrous diagonal slash that hits the villain's chest with the impact of a devastating explosion. The proto lands gracefully on the stone floor and comments with disdain that his cousin seemed to be chattering about something important just a moment ago. He concludes by saying with utter contempt that he wasn't paying the slightest attention to what he was saying, while observing Julius fallen among the wreckage of the tables. Aster approaches calmly and ironically asks if his defeated cousin would mind repeating all that arrogant speech one more time. He glares at his humiliated opponent and coldly warns that insignificant people like him should just keep their mouths shut. The young man massages his own neck and questions if all that previous staging was the absolute limit of Julius's power. Smites watches everything open-mouthed and murmurs in a complete state of ecstasy about how incredible his friend's counterattack was. The warrior mentally celebrates the fact that Aster actually managed to take down one of the most powerful tyrants of the main house. However, the proto's countenance quickly darkens upon realizing that the confrontation is still far from truly over. Julius begins to stand up slowly amidst the smoke, grumbling that physical strike actually hurt and sent him flying. He lets out a sarcastic laugh as he adjusts his shirt, asking what Aster would do if he had scratched his precious wing crest on his chest. Smate steps back startled and murmurs in a panic upon noticing that the villain seems to be perfectly fine and without any serious injury. Lillian watches that scene from afar and lets out a mocking chuckle upon seeing her brother stumble. The sadistic young woman taunts her brother, calling him pathetic for having taunted his opponent so much, only to end up being flung away in such a vexing manner. Julius draws his sword again with a serious look and complains to his sister that even he has feelings that can be hurt. The tyrant explodes in flaming fury and roars Aster's name, fuming that his cousin committed an unpardonable mistake by calling him trash. He warns that he was only playing until the current moment and threatens the proto, saying he has crossed all tolerable limits. Julius advances enveloped in a colossal wall of fire and roars, asking if his opponent is properly prepared to end right there. Maintaining absolute calm amidst the scalding heat, Aster focuses his energy and suggests they finish this quickly. The proto positions himself on guard and invites his cousin to attack him with everything he has once and for all. However, before the blades collide again, an imposing voice echoes through the room ordering both warriors to stop the confrontation immediately. Julius ceases his attack, surprised, and recognizes the newcomer as Count Maze, who complains about the trail of destruction and questions what they think a cafeteria is for. The Count explains that, in his capacity as director, he is forced to intervene personally if students decide to cause that kind of widespread uproar. Julius grinds his teeth annoyed and tells Maze to back off, sharply stating that a mere lackey of the 6th tier has no right to meddle in his business. Maze keeps the ironic smile on his face and warns that it would not be good at all for the reputation of a candidate for 1st tier valedictorian to go all out against a rookie opponent. He emphasizes that this kind of cowardly attitude would destroy the flawless image that the main heir tries to maintain before the elite academy. The Count positions himself between the rivals and kindly asks for Julius to sheath his flaming sword once and for all. Julius lets out a sigh of extreme irritation and grumbles that the meddler just completely ruined all the fun of that night. The tyrant yields to the Count's pressure and decides to store his weapon, announcing that he will let the matter slide for that single time. He calls his subordinates to leave the place, officially decreeing the end of that violent welcome party. Aster tries to run after him, shouting for him to wait, making it clear that he is not done settling things with his cousin. But Maze blocks the prota's advance by placing a firm hand on his shoulder and asking for sincere apologies for the interruption. The Count asks for the young man to do him a favor and avoid causing more trouble at that turbulent moment. Aster watches helplessly as the silhouette of his sister Alphen slowly walks away down the corridor along with the rest of the masked seniors. The young man calls desperately for Alphen's name in hopes of getting any response from his sister. Alphen hesitates for a moment and stares at her younger brother with a look of deep sadness over her shoulder, but remains in complete silence. She turns her gaze away with bitterness and resumes her pace, leaving the prota paralyzed with frustration in the middle of the destroyed cafeteria. The metallic sound of Alphen's boots echoes through the corridor as she leaves behind only one of the terrible iron masks fallen on the floor. Aster stares at the abandoned torture object and whispers his sister's name with a deep feeling of melancholy and helplessness. Later, in a private meeting room, Smite slams the table with anger and curses Julius, classifying him as an extremely dangerous lowlife. The warrior laments that Nolan was brutally defeated, and now needs to rest in the infirmary, full of bandages and severe burns. He adds with despair that several of their rookie companions were captured by force by the tyrants and taken away wearing those bizarre metal masks. Holding one of the iron shackles in his hands, Smites turns apprehensively to Aster and asks what they should do from now on to resolve that situation. Aster stares at Maze with suspicion and points out that, in his capacity as a count and authority figure, he should have prevented the atrocities committed by Julius. Maze's assistant shouts annoyed, accusing the young man of being extremely disrespectful to the Count, but the noble just raises his hand smiling and asks for calm. Maze stares at the prota with an enigmatic look and states in a relaxed manner that the two of them are already old acquaintances. Aster faces him in silence with his bright golden eyes, unable to forget the turbulent past they share. The prota recalls that 4 years ago, when he was summoned by the cruel main house, Maze was the only noble under Elmheim's banner to stand by his side and save him from demise. Despite having been saved by him in the past, Aster mentally admits that he still cannot decipher if the Count is truly a trustworthy ally or an enemy in disguise. Smots interrupts his friend's thoughts by questioning if Maz, being the acting director, really won't do anything to intervene. The warrior points out desperately that even if they are influential members of the main family, that violent tyranny should not be tolerated at the academy. Maze lets out a laugh and reminds everyone that he is also a high executive of Elmheim, emphasizing that he will never question the main house's actions unless a very grave problem occurs. Aster raises the iron mask outraged and questions if forcing torture devices onto innocent cadets to control them is not already a grave enough problem. The Count calmly counters, saying that the institution has always prioritized absolute merit, arguing that any method that accelerates the growth of warriors is valid for the board. He complements this by revealing that the Supreme Director himself approves of Julius's conduct, given that the cadets under his tutelage are rising in tiers at an impressive speed. Aster closes his eyes with melancholy upon realizing that he won't be able to count on the support of absolutely anyone influential within that institution. Upon seeing the young man walk away in silence, Maze asks if he plans to rescue his captured friends alone and firmly advises him to give up on that madness. The Count stares the prota directly in the eyes and warns that the main house is closely monitoring every single one of his steps. He observes that any impulsive act of rebellion will result in the prota's immediate expulsion, leaving him completely at the mercy of Matriarch Helen's ruthless fury. Aster walks with his head bowed, but mentally ponders that that threat of expulsion would never be a valid reason for him to abandon his companions. Holding the metallic object, the young man reflects that it is not just about an ordinary sense of justice, but the fact that those iron shackles destroy the human soul. He recalls with bitterness that the masks gradually deprive the victims of their freedom, their voice, and their most basic dignity. Aster concludes that the true horror of that device is the power to break people's will to resist, turning proud warriors into mere obedient tools. Maze stares at the young man's serious expression and comments, surprised that he speaks about the matter with the authority of someone who witnessed this pain up close. Displaying a subtle and enigmatic smile, the prota replies that he just knows very well the tragic fate of those who took too long to act. He turns determined and solemnly states that he will never allow that same terrible fate to happen to his new friends. Maze observes him walk away with a thoughtful look, intrigued by the true intentions motivating the actions of the bearer of the 7 wings. The Count sighs and decides to cast his worries aside for now, trusting in the prota's peculiar cunning. Aster adds that he also has no interest in being expelled from the academy in a foolish way, admitting he preferred to resolve that situation in the most peaceful way possible. Maze raises his eyebrows, curious, and asks if the young man already has some smart plan in mind. Aster displays the iron device in his hands and mockingly reminds the Count that he already knows his fighting style very well. The prota cracks a challenging smile and questions if the noble really doubts his ability to resolve that impasse. 3 days pass quickly at the Drossel Academy, with the new cadets running from one side to the other under the hot sun of the training courtyard. Smythe accompanies Nolan closely during the run and asks, extremely worried, if his companion is sure he should be exerting himself with all those injuries. Nolan ignores the pain of his severe burns and retorts, saying there is no time for rest because the advanced curriculum of the 4th tier is about to begin. The proud swordsman minimizes the suffering, stating that they are just silly scratches, making Smythe sigh upon noticing how stubborn and averse to defeat his friend can be. Smythe shifts his gaze forward and comments, worried that, in reality, they should all be focusing their worries on what Aster plans to do. He questions, intrigued, what on earth is passing through the prota's mind as he observes him walk resolutely toward enemy territory. Aster enters the main hall and confronts Julius, who mocks his cousin's audacity upon seeing him show his face there again after the last battle. The tyrant warns in a sharp tone that he has still not forgiven the prota for the previous humiliation, while remaining surrounded by his masked guards on standby. Julius drinks a sip of wine and comments, surprised about the fact that his cousin came to propose a friendly deal instead of trying to invade the place by force. The villain stares at Aster with a suspicious look, filled with hatred, demanding to know what he is really planning with that sudden visit. Aster maintains his unshakable composure and replies with total tranquility that his intentions are exactly the same as before. The young man extends his arm in a decided manner and declares loud and clear that he came to rescue his sister Alphen and all of his captured classmates. He throws one of the iron shackles to the floor and reveals that his only condition for freeing them is that Julius places that torture device on his own neck. Alphen widens her blue eyes in complete shock and despair behind her mask, mentally questioning if her younger brother has lost his mind for good. Aster ponders that Julius surely already knows of his reputation as a rebel, arguing that it would be a perfect bargain for the main house to manage to put a collar on a potential traitor. Lillian lets out a hysterical laugh and mockingly asks if the prota lost his wits by begging to become a masochistic pet of the main family. Julius reflects in silence and concludes that since Aster is a major thorn in his lineage's side, capturing him that way would surely leave his proud mother extremely satisfied. The villain darkens his expression in a threatening way and suspiciously admits he does not believe his cousin would accept slavery without resisting, demanding to know what the real trap behind the proposal is. Aster faces the sword tips pointed at his neck without showing the slightest reaction of fear and coldly replies that there is no hidden plan at all. Julius grinds his teeth and thoroughly studies the young man's calm and challenging gaze, trying to find any loophole or lie in his words. Aster audaciously reminds him that the iron shackles are locked magically, and only Julius possesses the power to remove them, giving his cousin the opportunity to end him at any moment should he decide to accept the deal. Aster taunts his cousin by asking if he is still not confident that he can tame him. Julius glares at him with deep irritation, extremely annoyed by that challenging attitude. The villain finally gives in and accepts to make the deal proposed by Aster, but Julius emphasizes that since the idea came from his cousin himself, a simple prisoner exchange would be too much kindness. He stipulates that Aster must spend 10 whole days without eating and without drinking water while wearing the iron mask. The tyrant guarantees with a maniacal smile that he will free all the prisoners if the young man manages to survive this trial. Alphen despairs behind her iron mask, thinking that surviving this is something totally impossible for her brother. She fears her younger brother will end up passing away from exhaustion in a terrible way. Aster accepts the terms and silently reflects that the terrible iron shackles rot a person's heart from the inside. Having been raised as a mere tool of Elmheim for so long, the young man understands the sad reality very well. He recalls that in the past, His adoptive sister was full of life and always tried to seem tough. Even being as fragile as any other person, she exerted herself to be a strong sister who never showed weakness. But now, she has totally lost the strength to challenge the tyrants and can only face him with a helpless look. The Proto mentally asks her not to worry because he will certainly destroy those bonds and the two of them will be able to talk again. Days later, one of the masked cadets collapses from exhaustion in the courtyard and is harshly reprimanded by a cruel instructor. The instructor demands that the young man stand up immediately, shouting that no one there has permission to rest. The young man exhausts his strength under the unbearable heat and desperately wonders why all of this is happening to him. Smites laments the instructor's ruthless cruelty and fears the prisoners will pass away even before Aster can save them. Nolan coldly comments that in the case of some of those cadets, they ended up reaping exactly what they sowed. But the warrior is surprised to note that even after several days under the same severe conditions, the Proto continues firm and strong. Smites wonders if bearers of the 7 wings are true monsters when it comes to physical endurance. Nolan ponders that an ordinary human being can survive for only 3 or 4 days without food and water. He emphasizes that this time extends to at most a week if the person remains totally motionless. However, Aster spent the last few days participating in extremely exhausting combat training. He even carried heavy logs into the river, making the fact that he has still not reached his physical limit incomprehensible. It is then that Nolan remembers an intriguing rumor about Aster's past before he was adopted by the Viscount's family. Legends say that as a mere infant, he crawled alone for several miles amidst the deep snow of a mountain. Smites is shocked by the story and comments that if this is true, that boy's life force is simply surreal. Despite everything, Nolan prefers to believe that it is all just a silly and exaggerated rumor. When night falls, silence takes over the Academy's Great Hall. Liliane appears at the location accompanied by her henchmen and mockingly announces that the time for the prisoners' feeding has arrived. With a snap of her fingers enveloped in purple magic, she activates the mechanisms of the devices. The magical glow causes the prisoners' masks to open partially so they can receive their meal. Each of the youths receives only a measly piece of dry cheese and a cup of water. One of the boys glares at that misery in despair, crying that he has already reached his absolute limit and will end up perishing if it continues like this. The orange-haired cadet begs on his knees for her to have mercy and give him decent food. But the sadistic girl responds by ruthlessly crushing his food with the heel of her boot. She mocks the situation, saying that if the young man did not want to eat that, he should have just warned her before. Liliane adds that wasting food is a terrible sin, especially when compared to the situation of another person. She points to Aster sitting in a dark corner and reminds them that there are people there going through much worse trials. Julius, who is savoring a juicy steak nearby, ironizes his cousin's willpower, asking if he isn't someone admirable. He turns to Alfin and sadistically suggests that she go over there to give some moral support to her little brother. The villain laughs cruelly and claims she probably does not have the courage to face him since the Proto ended up in that deplorable state just to save her. While Julius laughs hysterically, Alfin gnashes her teeth amidst deep anguish. The young woman tightens her own fists, trembling with guilt, not knowing what to do to change that terrible situation. Julius eats another piece of meat and suspiciously reflects on what is really happening, since he was sure his cousin possessed an escape plan up his sleeve. He glares at the motionless Proto against the wall and finds it strange that the young man does not display absolutely any reaction of revolt. The tyrant wonders if Aster really plans to endure the whole punishment quietly for 10 long days. Julius displays a wicked smile and decides he will love to see how far that bastard's pride will take him before being completely broken. The villain concludes that the best thing to do for now is just relax and enjoy the unfolding of that pathetic show of endurance. It all begins with an explanation that when coating a sword with magic, the blade becomes infinitely sharper. In the same way, if a warrior coats their own body with the same magical force, it will function as protective armor. The instructor teaches the students that magic possesses incredible flexibility and assumes varied functions according to the user's willpower. It can be molded into the legs to make a warrior run much faster than a horse at maximum speed, or even concentrated in the eyes to detect the presence and exact position of any enemy hidden in the surroundings. During practical training in the forest, some masked opponents seize the chance to surround and attack the Proto, but magic can also be used by surprise as an overwhelming trump card capable of completely changing the course of a confrontation. One of the attackers is totally shocked to suddenly find himself trapped in a vortex of wind generated by the boy. He can barely think straight while being sucked in by the force of the red manic. The opponents look up in despair, wondering where Aster could have disappeared to in the middle of that windstorm. Without giving time for reactions, the Proto resurfaces in the air and knocks out his adversaries with a precise strike coming from above. The instructor had previously explained that 4th tier training would strictly forbid the use of swords to focus only on the advanced manipulation of pure magic. The goal of the classes was to make everyone there learn to master this monoprojection technique. He emphasizes that bearers of a wing crest must be capable of eliminating their targets without depending on any physical weapon in combat. Back in the forest clearing, Aster breathes heavily surrounded by his fallen opponents, trying to control his physical fatigue. That is already the 7th consecutive day in which he endures the burden of the terrible iron shackles since the beginning of the arduous academic training. He reflects that he has already managed to get used to that practical manipulation a bit, leaving only 3 days until the deal's deadline. The boy knows that if he manages to hold on firm for just this brief period, his sister Alphen and all the other cadets will be freed once and for all. However, he ponders that he cannot continue acting in such a passive manner before his tyrants. Aster remembers perfectly well that Julius demonstrated being the owner of an overwhelming power even without wielding a sword in his hands. He knows very well that his cousin has still not revealed his real and hidden strength, given that he is part of the prestigious 1st tier of knights. The young man stands up with difficulty and concludes that he has no time to lose staying stagnant in a place like that. He understands that even under such extreme conditions of fatigue, he needs to obtain at least one new skill that reduces the massive power gap between them. Suddenly, his vision begins to get blurry and the trees around him seem to sway without control. Aster feels a terrible chill and realizes that his body has finally begun to give severe signs of physical exhaustion. The boy collapses unconscious on the damp grass while feeling the entire world spin upside down. At that moment, a figure approaches with slow steps and comments that the young warrior has finally reached the limit of his strength. Nolan places his hand on his forehead and notes that he is burning with a fever, something that was already expected for a mere human being. The silver-haired swordsman complains in a sarcastic tone that Count Maze expressly asked for him to help him if anything grave happened. Aster wonders why the enigmatic Count would have such a massive interest in his personal safety in that place. Nolan decides to ignore the doubts and warns that he will fetch a sword immediately to break the iron shackles covering his friend's face. But in a surprising way, Aster raises his arm with the strength he has left and firmly holds his companion's wrist. Nolan stares at the young man with incredulity and demands to know what he thinks he is trying to do with that stubborn attitude. The swordsman sharply warns that he will certainly pass away if he continues refusing to receive any help. The Proto counters saying that if he gives up there, no one else will be able to save his sister Alphen, begging for Nolan to avoid unnecessary interferences. Nolan lets out a long sigh and admits he can barely understand his muffled speech, but perfectly notices his deep displeasure. He warns the Proto that no matter how faithfully he clings to the promise, the enemy side does not possess the same honor to keep it. Suddenly, several hostile cadets with red eyes emerge from the tree shadows surrounding the duo silently. In the middle of them emerges Liliane, who glares at Aster's debilitated state with evident mockery in her eyes. The sadistic girl taunts the boy, saying he looks like a walking corpse that could be mistaken for a zombie at any moment. The Proto glares at her with contained fury and mentally whispers the terrible villain's name. Nolan takes the lead and coldly questions what a second-tier student like her is doing in the middle of training exclusive to the 4th tier. Liliane replies with irony that those 4th-tier cadets just wanted to show off for her, and therefore, she decided to accompany them closely. She deceitfully adds that the visit functions as a mere class observation, ensuring that the Drassel instructor did not oppose her presence there. The cruel young woman reveals that what she really most desires to witness in that clearing is something quite different. She gestures in an exaggerated manner and pretends to beg for mercy in hopes of making fun of someone else's pain. Liliane makes it clear that she wants to see Aster crying and begging for clemencia on his knees before everyone. She settles quietly on a tree branch and cynically asks for the guys to act naturally and ignore her presence. With a cruel command, Lillian orders the cadets to advance once and for all to destroy one another right there in the clearing. Aster blocks one of the incoming strikes and realizes that the enemy Elmheim clan plans to annihilate him before the 10-day deadline officially closes. Aster feels guilty for having ended up dragging Nolan into the middle of that terrible mess. However, Nolan fights bravely by his side and grumbles that forbidding a knight from drawing his sword is a totally ridiculous rule. Aster analyzes the battlefield and realizes that facing so many opponents head-on at the same time will only serve to quickly deplete his few energies. He tries to reason desperately, in search of a trump card that does not consume much energy to break the enemy encirclement before he ends up defeated for good. Watching everything from above, Lillian mocks the confrontation, saying that without weapons, they only manage to engage in a lamentable and clumsy street fight. The girl continues taunting Aster by commenting that trying to stay firm and proud must be the hardest task for him in that moment of weakness. She displays a wicked smile and coldly claims that all that pain is the exclusive fault of his stubbornness in not surrendering. Lillian adds that the boy's obstinate refusal to give up serves only to make his suffering even more miserable. While facing another cadet, Nolan notices a treacherous attack from behind and screams desperately for Aster to dodge immediately. But being debilitated and without strength, the Proto cannot manage to move in time to escape the violent onslaught. Aster widens his eyes as he feels the imminent danger approach from behind without being able to do anything to prevent it. The devastating impact of the punch loaded with energy hits the Proto full force, flinging him with violence. Aster spits a large amount of blood from behind his iron mask and collapses without strength. The young man's body collides violently against the clearing's ground, kicking up a large cloud of dust in the forest. Nolan is completely horrified to see his friend motionless on the ground and desperately wonders if he ended up passing away due to the blow. However, Lillian orders from the top of the tree for her henchmen to stop the attack, remembering that she still intends to keep Aster alive to be her pet. One of the opponents pulls Aster brutally by his hair, raising his bloody and completely helpless face. Lillian reinforces the order for them to just beat him up without reaching the point of taking the young man's life. In this crucial instant of suffering, the boy opens his eyes shining in a vivid gold and realizes that he finally managed to obtain what he sought so much. Sharp lines of red mana suddenly erupt from Aster's body, spreading like sharp blades. Lillian loses the sadistic smile from her face and lets out a whisper of pure surprise upon noticing the release of that hostile energy. The opponent holding him lets out a scream of agonizing pain upon having his arm severely slashed by the invisible force. The attacker steps back startled and realizes that Aster's energy traveled directly up his own arm the moment he touched him. The Proto rises slowly amidst the dust, enveloped by wind currents that behave like pure cutting blades. Another opponent glares at the scene confused, trying to understand if that is some bizarre type of defensive magical barrier. Confident in his brute strength, the big guy advances again against Aster to try and crush him once and for all. Maintaining absolute calm, Aster just extends his arm in the direction of the approaching opponent. The two collide their forces in a direct clash in the middle of the forest clearing. In the same instant, an explosion of scarlet slashes envelops the attacker's body in a merciless way. The big guy collapses bloody on the ground, completely defeated by the boy's lethal counterattack. Lillian watches that scene perplexed and trembling, unable to believe that a mere fourth-tier student could perform such a feat. The villain realizes shocked that her cousin somehow learned to master the legendary magic attribute alteration technique. This is an elite skill totally distinct from basic physical reinforcement or weapon spells. It is a complex manipulation variation that grants unique and deadly properties to the user's own energy. Nolan observes the scene impressed and recalls that Julius's fire magic functions under this same principle. The tyrant's ability is capable of burning and reducing to ashes anything that comes into contact with his flames. Meanwhile, Aster's newly refined mana fests the attribute of cutting, surgically slicing absolutely everything it touches. The surviving opponents step back horrified upon realizing the level of that technique, which even second-year veterans have extreme difficulty learning. With a swift and precise movement, Aster advances against the rest of the attackers and slashes them in the blink of an eye. Nolan concludes in a solemn manner that the boy before him has reached an astonishing new level of power. The Proto has now become perfectly capable of eliminating his adversaries without needing to use absolutely any sword. The young bearer of the 5 wings mentally admits that his companion of the 7 wings continues a step ahead of him. Liliane lands gently on the ground and cynically claps her hands, admitting she did not expect her cousin to go so far. However, she points to the bodies on the ground and notes that despite all the visual spectacle, Aster intentionally avoided delivering a single lethal strike. The girl steps without mercy on the back of one of her fallen soldiers and states that the warriors of her faction will not be stopped with just that. She draws a short dagger and channels her wicked magical energy through the blade. Liliane furiously roars for the defeated warriors to stand up immediately and keep fighting. Nolan glares at the girl with deep disgust and revulsion in the face of so much cruelty toward her own subordinates. Suddenly, a sharp metallic sound echoes through the clearing as the clasp of the iron shackles begins to crack in a surprising way. The terrible torture devices shatter completely and plunge broken onto the forest lawn, leaving Liliane in absolute shock. Linen widens her eyes in complete shock, not understanding what just happened. One of the cadets touches his own face, confused, unable to comprehend how his mask could simply come loose. He lets out a sigh of immense relief upon realizing that he can finally breathe freely again. Nolan faces the proto with a look of deep admiration and surprise at the boy's cunning. The silver-haired swordsman realizes that in the middle of all that chaotic fight, Aster planned in advance to deliver precise strikes to break the mask's magical locks. Liliane soon recovers her arrogant posture and disdains the situation, stating that it changes nothing in the end. The villain claims mockingly that the prisoners have already been so well domesticated that they will put the mask back on of their own accord, making the proto's attempt at heroism useless. However, seeing that the cadets hesitate to move, Liliane loses her patience and shouts, asking what they think they are doing. She fumes furiously, ordering the subordinates to advance immediately to capture the proto once and for all. But she swallows hard upon realizing that the looks of those guys have now completely changed after recovering their freedom. The sadistic girl takes a step back, startled upon noticing the atmosphere of silent revolt that has settled in the clearing. Nolan cracks an ironic smile and comments that once free from the bonds, the true nature of those cadets prove they are not obedient dogs willing to bite on command. The young man challenges the villain directly, asking if she herself will have the courage to face them in combat now that she's without her army of slaves. Liliane grinds her teeth in pure frustration upon finding herself cornered and without control of that advantageous situation. No one notes his friend's silence and asks what is wrong, since Aster still cannot speak due to the shackles on his face. The swordsman casually offers to speak on the proto's behalf and convey his message to the villain. Liliane lets out a bitter laugh and comments that with such cutting power, breaking his own mask would have been an extremely simple task for Aster from the very start. She mocks the fact that he chose to obediently endure all that punishment until the agreed deadline just to keep his word to the main family. The sadistic girl warns him with a dark smile that being so naive and following rules in a cruel world will end up costing him very dearly in the future. The proto remains motionless in the middle of the clearing while silently reflecting on his cousin's harsh words. Aster mentally ponders that as the heir of the honored Viscount house, he could never act in a dishonorable manner or do something his late adoptive father would be ashamed of. But his strength finally comes to an end, and the young man's debilitated body begins to tilt toward the ground. Nolan screams desperately upon seeing his companion collapse without any reaction in the middle of the forest. Aster closes his eyes and mentally laments for not managing to stay conscious for longer after so much physical effort. However, before hitting the ground, the young man is caught by the warm arms of his beloved sister, Alphen. Aster babbles Marfa's name amidst his feverish and delirious state. Alphen glares at her younger brother's worn face and whispers that he continues to be the same reckless and stubborn boy from when they were children. She asks for sincere apologies in tears, lamenting the fact that even being the older sister, she is always the one who ends up being saved by him. She hugs him tightly against her chest and confesses that her brother's unshakable determination finally gave her the courage she needed. Alphen ensures the sleeping young man that he no longer needs to carry all that burden alone and that now everything will be fine. Later, Aster wakes up startled in a dark infirmary room, screaming Marfa's name at the top of his lungs. The proto sits up quickly in bed with his heart racing and his body covered in cold sweat. He glares at the large windows of the quiet room and tries to understand if the encounter with that figure from the past was just a hallucination of his feverish mind. Upon pulling the blanket, the young man notes a small, strange object left on his bed's mattress. It is a carefully folded letter addressed especially to him. Asur opens the piece of paper and widens his golden eyes upon reading the first lines of the handwritten message. Panic takes over the boy upon realizing the terrible meaning behind those desperate words. Without hesitating for even a single second, he leaps from the bed and runs desperately through the dark corridors, fearing the worst. Midway, an imposing and familiar voice orders him to stop immediately, questioning where he plans to go in such a rush. Count Maze positions himself before him and seriously warns that the young man's body is not in proper conditions even to walk, let alone run in that manner. The noble shifts his gaze to the floor and curiously glares at the crumpled paper the Proto ended up dropping amidst the despair. Maze retrieves the letter and begins to read the message where Alphen expresses her deep gratitude and asks for forgiveness for past mistakes. She writes that she feels guilty for having forced such a young brother to fight, while she, a coward, never had the courage to act. The young woman reveals in her farewell message that it has reached her turn to be strong and do everything to save her beloved brother's life. She fondly recalls the occasion when Astur risked his own life to protect her in a heroic way during the Sword Dance Festival. In the present, Astur runs in a panic through the academy corridors and curses his sister's decision to commit such massive madness. He knows perfectly well that the main house is ruthless and fears the dire consequences should something bad happen to her. The boy slams the main doors open with violence, questioning himself what his entire sacrifice up to there would have served for if he ended up losing his sister. But the Proto freezes completely at the threshold of the hall upon confronting a terrible scene before his eyes. Astur watches in absolute despair as his sister Alphen lies inert on the cold floor under the direct threat of her executioner's sharp blade. Liliane yawns with disdain upon seeing the boy's arrival and lazily comments that it is already past his bedtime. She mocks, saying neither of the two siblings possesses manners, while observing Astur cradle Alphen with desperation. The Proto holds his sister firmly in his arms and silently begs for her to hold on and stay alive. Liliane reveals in a sadistic way that Alphen came there to humiliate herself and beg for her brother's release, thinking he would perish due to the punishment. The villain tells how she found it amusing to see that shy and scared girl suddenly show such a determined look before the main family tyrants. She confesses with a monstrous smile that such audacity annoyed her so much that she decided to play a little with the girl. Upon hearing that barbaric confession, an unprecedented lethal fury completely consumes Astur's heart. Liliane mocks even further, saying the aggression helped her de-stress and that now she will certainly have a great night of sleep. The Proto hugs his sister with pain and bitterly concludes that he was too foolish and complacent trying to follow the rules from the very start. He regrets having tried to make peaceful deals instead of simply rescuing his companions using brute force. Astur knows that if he had acted in a ruthless manner before, Alphen would never have needed to commit that desperate madness to save him. He recalls the teachings of his late adoptive father, who explained that a true knight must be patient and endure any absurdity in life. The veteran noble emphasized that patience was crucial to preserve status, social position, and the success of their combat missions. Hifrid argued that depending on what one wishes to protect, often choosing not to fight is the best and wisest option for a warrior. The Viscount insisted that even when humiliated or physically injured, a knight must never act driven purely by fury or cheap emotions. Back then, the little Astra questioned unconformed if they should just accept the aggression without fighting back if they were attacked by enemies. Hifrid replied calmly that the secret was not submission, but rather never losing sight of the real purpose and the perfect moment to act. The late noble urged the boy to always reflect on the true motives that lead him to wield a sword and enter combat. He emphasized that a strong warrior must have the answer to these questions always engraved in his heart before acting. In the present, Astur finally finds the answers amidst the fury and admits he took too long to wield his sword for real. Liliane widens her eyes, confused upon noticing a sudden and frightening alteration in the Great Hall's atmosphere. The sword fallen on the floor begins to vibrate intensely and is attracted directly by the powerful energy emanated by the boy. The Proto grips the weapon's hilt tightly, channeling all his violent mana through the metal blade. With his sister protected in one of his arms, he raises the sword enveloped in a golden aura of colossal proportions. An earth-shattering explosion of golden energy sweeps the entire hall, cracking the stone ground and destroying everything around. Liliane lets out a scream of absolute panic upon being flung far by the overwhelming shockwave of that mana. Even the arrogant Julius glares at the scene in complete silence, impressed with the magnitude of the strength demonstrated by his cousin. Consumed by a blind fury, Aster mentally decides that the time has come to eliminate all his enemies there. He focuses his golden eyes on the villains and vows to eradicate each of the proud main family's oppressors without leaving a trace. The proto roars with a chilling bloodlust, determined to massacre everyone who dared to injure his beloved sister. Amidst the chaos, Alphen awakens weak for an instant and desperately begs for her brother to recover his reason and not lose himself in hatred. The young woman recalls with dread that ancient occasion when Aster lost control of his faculties and almost became an untamable monster. From afar, an influential figure of the clan observes the shining windows of the tower and murmurs, shocked upon recognizing the signature of that destructive mana. Matriarch Helen glares at the horizon with deep anger upon feeling the earth-shattering energy of the heir of the Seven Wings. Count Maze swallows hard in the infirmary, desperately wondering if the Proto has in fact lost control and lost his mind for good. The noble observes the Academy Tower tremble under the energy's fury and calls for the young man's name with immense worry. In the ruined hall, Aster prepares to deliver a lethal attack and advances against his opponents without a shred of hesitation. He delivers a violent sword strike that rips through the air and spreads a devastating wave of golden energy. Liliane lets out a yelp of pure dread and cowers in a desperate attempt to escape imminent demise. Julius widens his red eyes and realizes he will need to intervene personally to prevent his cousin from committing a massacre. The tyrant positions himself quickly in front of his sister and uses his own flaming sword to block Aster's overwhelming strike. Julius displays a smile of pure excitement amidst the blade collision, noting that is the legendary strength of the Seven Wings. The villain taunts his cousin by commenting that now he understands the elder leader's interest in him, praising the fact that he manages to manifest such power even on the brink of demise. However, Julius mockingly questions if Aster really is sure he wishes to start that widespread battle there. The tyrant laughs in derision and asks if all the sacrifice and punishment Aster endured quietly to protect his companions will have been in vain if he decides to end them all now. Seized by a deep hatred, Aster ignores the taunts and roars Elmheim's name while advancing again with full force against his cousin. Julius smiles with derision and asks if he lost the ability to speak, arrogantly adding that it was already in his plans to resolve that dispute. Blades of fire and pure mana collide violently in the center of the hall, generating constant explosions of magical sparks. The villain declares with psychotic fury that he needed to crush him personally anyway and invites him to settle that rivalry once and for all. Aster faces him, with his bright golden eyes covered in hatred, ready to discharge all his destructive power against the main house leader.